What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Build Different podcast with Tucker Speed. This episode, I was joined by Spencer Luczak and Casey Lamprecht. Casey is with Salty Motorworks, a really cool, unique shop in Salt Lake. They kind of do some high-end car stuff, some really kind of unique builds and stuff like that. And he does some custom bike builds more on a personal level. And it's cool to hear his story and kind of his take on bikes. Spencer is kind of well known as a motocross, like a replica bike builder, has a lot of connections in the motocross and off-road world. He's a riding coach. So getting some different points of view in the motorcycling community is always cool. And I had a really good conversation with these guys. And I think you guys will enjoy this one. We talked a lot about life and life lessons and how motorcycles relate to all that. So it was a great conversation. I think you guys will enjoy it. But first, just remember this podcast is brought to you by tuckerspeed.com, your one-stop shop for all your performance-related needs for your Harley-Davidson motorcycles. And please, before we jump in, give us a follow, leave us a 5-star review, help us keep this thing growing. Enjoy this episode.
Making power by day, making friends at night. Build different, Tucker Speed. Hell yeah, brother.
Is this your first podcast?
No, I did one for music back in the day.
Oh, okay.
Music.
For music production back when I was making beats.
Oh yeah, that's no, not my first podcast. Pulp MX or some like moto ones that I've been on every now and again.
Right.
And then other little things, but I'm used to, like, being camera's the easy part, like the mic in the face, like if you're like doing rider talent and stuff. But usually I have a helmet on, so now that someone can see my facial expressions,
that's a little different.
I'm also that guy. I'm sure it might come up in conversation when people ask, "What do you like to ride? How'd you grow up? Did you grow up riding? What's your deal?" Or how would someone recognize you on a motorcycle? It's always a fun question to ask, right? Because typically we wear our normal gear, even street, road, doesn't matter. Like, you could be in full leathers, but would someone be able to tell that it's Tony on a bike, or would someone recognize Casey on a motorcycle?
Sure.
Right? It comes with personality. A lot of my students that I teach, whether that's mountain biking, motocross, or skiing, they know it's me, because once I start getting into my flow state, you will see my head bobbing because I'm singing to myself, or I'm laughing, or if I'm chasing someone like in a race, I'm that guy that's coming up on people like chirping at them, where I'm just like, "Oh yeah, I got you. And they hear me laughing, and so I'll, like, being from Wyoming, I'll say yeehaw or like hell yeah. And so as we start moving, I will have students and they're like, "Yeah, you don't shut up. You're like a Jack Russell Terrier. You just keep going and going and going." But I'm having fun. I'm in that flow state and I forget about pretense and my ego's down.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious, what would you look like as a rider? Would I recognize you on the track or on the road?
If I had to say, because I ride tents, I'm not a good thing. It's not a good thing.
Forgetting to breathe?
Forgetting to breathe, forgetting to relax.
Are you talking just on the road normally, out on the track?
No, racetrack. If it's street, no big deal.
Sure.
But before we get too far, I just want to say, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out tonight. And just quickly introduce you guys so people know who we're talking to. Casey Lamprecht.
Yep.
Nice.
If I say it too many times, I'll forget how to say it.
We'll just leave it.
Yeah, Lamprecht.
Okay. Salty Motorworks.
Yep.
Any other businesses you need to plug or want to plug?
Yeah.
Because I know you're kind of a man of many talents.
It's been building up, and it's starting to actually go somewhere. But a company called Rare Form that I'm starting, machining motorcycle parts, as well as kind of just prototyping and designing things. But that is something that I'll be diving into much deeper over this year.
Okay. And Spencer Luczak.
Yeah. No, you're all good. The C is silent. You don't want to know the Polish version.
All right.
Yeah, it sounds angry.
Yeah. And just tell everybody kind of what's your day job, and then
Sure.
all your little side gigs you got going as well.
Yeah, I'm an international man of mystery. Typically, like how I like to.
Yeah.
Right.
I was trying to look up what does this guy do during the day? Like, what's his gig? And it's like
play in the shadows.
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, it's been a mix of, job hunting and honestly figuring out what's my purpose in life.
Okay.
Like that's been a big pull the last few years. But I do help a company on the side. It's a protein bar company that's here in Salt Lake now, which is great because I get to plug into athletics in a different realm, whether that's Olympic team sports or Ragnar or Spartan road race series. So part of my life as an athlete through college and beyond, team sports was big, or were big for me, as well as being on a bike. So I work for them part-time, and then I also help my dad. He does custom homes and, let's just say, dirt work. We make dirt. We're known for our dirt. And a lot of that is done at the Flying Iron Horse Ranch, which is our family property, and that's where the racetracks sit.
Right.
So even though I don't necessarily get paid for them, a big part of my influence, shooting commercials, like R&D testing, training for athletes, photo shoots. We just got done on a 4-part series for Red Bull. I can't say too much about it. It should be releasing soon. It's a 2-stroke edit, but it took us an entire year to film. And that was done at our property. So I'm the one that's with my dad building the racetracks, doing the landscaping, getting everything prepped. So the vision of the place itself is creating an atmosphere. So I don't know if you'd call it a job as much as it is a passion project on steroids.
Sure.
And that welcomes in different parts of the moto community.
Yeah.
Adventure bikes, moto. We've shot stuff for Triumph and Harley up there. People jumping over these bikes or just on the river. So it's kind of a roundabout way to be involved, not as an athlete, but my day-to-day is kind of that mix of a normal job and something else.
Sure.
But as far as the companies that I would associate myself with, the Flying Iron Horse Ranch is our property. It's family property. We have a variety of things going on there.
How many acres is up there?
About 150.
Oh, okay. That's a lot more than I thought.
Yeah, just outside of Park City.
Yeah.
It's beautiful up there.
Yeah.
It's the first track I ever rode.
Really?
That's a good point. It's been a hot minute.
I wasn't prepared.
No. We'll get you up there.
I need to. I have a buddy that's ridden there a couple of times, and he's invited me a couple of times. I'm just always so busy that I wasn't able to make it, but he's been up there a few times.
We'll try and get you up there then. Even having guys from the shop to come up if they want to bring their family. I mean, it's blue ribbon fly fishing, and then we have our field. So
Jordan's in.
Yeah, cornhole, ultimate frisbee. I mean, I take the golf clubs up there. Sometimes I just tie a tube to one of our bridges that we brought in, and I'll sit in the water and just kind of float, but I'm not going anywhere. And I just stare at a big black rock. Yeah, there's a 200-foot black rock that juts out of the hill, and the river bends around it. So the scenery is nice to just get away. But then we do have our track in the front yard. That's a hybrid between supercross and outdoors. And that's where a lot of guys trained for supercross during COVID. And that's
I remember that.
Out.
Like you guys had
the big guys.
the top.
The top. Ken Roxon, Chad Reed, like except for 2 of the guys from Cowie, we had everyone. We've had Jeremy McGrath up there. We just got done with Carson Brown with Red Bull. A lot of different people. So it's been humbling to see guys like that come in. And at first they're skeptical because they don't know who we are personally.
Sure.
And they've seen some of the bikes that I've built for Red Bull Straight Rhythm or dirt bike magazines, but they've never seen me in person. So they don't really know what they're stepping into. And then they kind of look around. They're like, what is this place? I'm like, this is the front yard. The backyard, we just got out of a 7-year lawsuit on. I'm sure maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later. That is a full outdoor national. It's 2 miles long, 1,000 feet of elevation change in 1 lap. I mean, it's a big undertaking, but that's one where you could come around and you don't have to jump everything, but you have all this natural terrain and different style of layout. So it's not just turn and jump. We have sections called the roller coaster, and there's the toilet bowl. Then there's the freeway step up. Our starting line alone is longer than Glen Helen, so we're over 1,000 feet to the first turn. Your 5th gear wide open on a 450.
Wow.
Just hauling ass into that thing. So that's the kind of stuff we like to build.
Is it like a tight turn at the end, or is it kind of wide open like
Big Talladega turn up on the hillside, left-hand turn, so you can use your brake if you need.
Yeah.
But it goes up the hill with a slight little drop into a bank turn that's 80 feet wide across. And we have
plenty of room then.
We have the starting line itself is 180 feet wide to fit a 42-man outdoor national gate. So we have that actual gate, and whether we host events there or not, we own the gate.
There.
So we will put it in, and it will be just like a MotoGP, MX Donations, outdoor national setup on steroids. And then we make our own dirt, and we've been doing the landscaping. So imagine, if you will, Formula One and the PGA had a baby. and put that into moto, that's kind of what the backyard will feel like with the quality of the dirt.
Really?
And it just creates an atmosphere that when you're inside of it, it's like a big video game.
It's a landscaped track. Like the landscaping looks great.
Yeah, just as is. So that's, and again, for no other reason that we love it. I'll talk about it later, why we even started building the place.
Sure.
But that would be kind of the main thing that I'm tied to. And then Ride Rad is a small little LLC that I do on the side when I coach people how to bike or ski and do things there. And Rad comes from the BMX movie.
I love that movie.
Yeah, so my license plate says Live Rad.
Okay.
My Harley, when I owned that, said Rad. My other phone says Ride Rad. So I mean, like everything is tied to it. And there's a little bit of rock and roll that's always infused.
Yeah.
Even the name Flying Iron Horse Ranch. Fly By Night is a song by Rush. That was big for my dad. Fly By Night Racing was his race company when he promoted. And then Bon Jovi's Wanted Dead or Alive. He talks about on a steel horse we ride. We just changed it to Iron Horse because we build homes and we like iron. So the name Flying Iron Horse is actually rock and roll and motorcycles.
And
All in one.
All in one.
Kind of wrapped up. Just
Yeah. It gives
kind of your
feel.
life kind of wrapped up into
100%.
one title.
And that's
100%.
how you name your bikes too, right? They're inspired by
Yeah.
women in music.
I know a lot of people name their cars. Yeah, right. Women in music. Sold.
What else is there?
A cold beverage, which we have, and I'm
Yeah.
pretty good to go. Happy camper. Yeah, Casey's got a good point. I think how even for me in the bike world that started was I took a passion, which was riding a bike. I looked at the bikes that I loved from back in the day, just like people build old cars and they say, man, when I was in high school, this was my favorite, or they work with their dad on building a car. Well, in the moto world, as far as dirt bikes go, I graduated high school in 2005. So I turned 37. There you go. I just aged myself.
You're young.
I'm a young pup, right? This gray hair is experience and genetics, I guess. First bike I started building was a 2004 KX 125, the Pro Circuit Factory Cowie team. That was like the ideal bike I wanted. Finding one was tough. I really didn't know how far down the rabbit hole I would go into customizing this bike. And we'll get into that later. But essentially, I named her Roxanne by the Police, because every time I'd hear that song as a kid, I was like, man, there's just something about that woman. You can't trust her, but you want to go after her, right?
Yep.
And so Roxanne became the persona for the bike, but then the theme behind it was Motley Crue's Kickstart My Heart, because I grew up on rock and roll, and I was like, it just had that feel. I could play the soundtrack in my head, and I'm like, that's the vibe that I'm getting from what I'd want to be doing. And kind of from there, every bike just took on a name. I wouldn't usually name them ahead of time. It was either in the build process or after I wrote it.
When something triggers you, like this bike, this bike and this song strike the same emotion or something, and all of a sudden it's like, yep, that's it.
100%.
That's kind of the process.
Yeah, and it would dawn on me. I wouldn't ask people for their opinions to say, hey, what should I name it? What do you think? That's all internal. And I think everyone that's ever, thrown a leg over a bike has a connection with that motorcycle, which is why if you asked anyone, hey, what's your favorite bike? It's a hard question. Normally you'd go back to what was your first love or what brought the most memory. And it could be a bike that honestly is just a piece of junk as far as technology goes.
Sure.
But they have an affinity for it because there's some sort of tangible or palpable connection to the machine.
To that, yeah.
And that's what would happen. And rock and roll was instilled in me from an early childhood, not just from my parents, but my dad used to run country and rock and roll concert series. So being backstage to like REO Speedwagon or Styx or something, I would stay up as late as I could as a 6-year-old to listen to Dust in the Wind by Kansas. But of course, I can't make it that long, so I fall asleep at 8 o'clock. And sure enough, what do they play at the end of the concert? The song I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So I think it was just in my blood. And every time I get on a bike, something from rock and roll will pop up where I have that little smile. And it reminds me it's time to ride. Like for me.
Right on.
Right. So it's that 2-wheel therapy that everyone gets. I just kind of took it to the next level. And then you would see rock and roll always come out of my bikes. You'll see like a sticker or something on it. And you would know 100% like that guy's, that's him.
Yeah.
And I don't even have to be there.
That's
you would just
cool.
know like that's that bike.
Something a long time ago that I wanted to do, this was way back before I even kind of really started kind of building bikes. and I never did anything about it, but I had this kind of vision. I wanted to be a bike builder, and I wanted to name my bikes after a surf song. Like,
Surfing.
Like, like whatever song was, I was into during that build. You know what I mean?
Got it.
I love surf music.
Okay.
It kind of,
What do you mean when you say surf music? Like Beach Boys?
I mean, I like the Beach Boys, but more like Dick Dale, the Ventures,
okay.
stuff like that, like heavy guitar. A lot of that stuff is like there's no lyrics. It's just all
Instrumental.
acoustic, instrumental, like just
But creates a vibe.
yeah. It just like strikes like an emotion in me that I think motorcycles do as well. Sometimes it's hard for me with motorcycles anymore because I'm just surrounded by them all day. So it's hard for a motorcycle to strike that, speak to me,
Sure.
like
Does
it
that
used
still
to.
happen?
It still happens, but it's rare, and I kind of have to hunt for it and find new ways to
Interesting.
kind of hit that emotion. But it's kind of like the same feeling. Like I think it's probably the same for you. I'll hear a surf song, and it'll just take me to a different place or make me feel a certain way. Kind of the way like you look at certain motorcycles and you're like, oh, that's such a cool bike, and whatever it is, you can picture yourself riding it, or maybe it's a bike that you saw somebody racing back in the day and you're like, oh, I remember watching that guy race that bike, or whatever it is. It's kind of the same thing.
So what would you say then when you do get those little sparks, right? Something ignites you, even if it's a little bit, right? You're inundated by bikes all the time.
Yeah.
It is your job, right? We're at a bike shop,
Right.
but it started from the love of riding, the love of racing, and just being around them. So when you get these little sparks of passion or you're ignited somehow, what are those things? Is it a paint color? Is it a smell? Is it a location?
That's an interesting question.
I could say it could be any one of those things.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Right, just to know that you're still feeling something.
Yeah.
You're not numb to it to say like, oh, my passion has become my work and therefore I've lost.
I'm
I've
kind
lost
of
the edge.
numb to it at times. Yeah. And kind of the Harley world or the V-twin world and culture really grabbed a hold of me at one point in my life. I mean, hence why I'm sitting here and doing what I'm doing. And it's hard for a Harley to do that for me anymore. Kind of strike that emotion because I'm so
fair.
in it every day, smelling it, hearing it, working on it all
I
day.
experience the same thing because it's not with motorcycles, but I'm working on vehicles all day, and a lot of the time, like, they are nice, interesting vehicles. And initially, when I started, I had like the passion that there was zero distraction in the world. It was so easy for me to work 12 hours a day. It felt like I was doing the right thing, and I had that interest just to outweigh everything else. And that does fade over time for me. But there still are times, and it's usually when I'm by myself. I get to the shop early. I get there at 7 in the morning. And for like the first 2 hours, if I get hit with those waves, it's when I'm by myself
I
early in
agree.
the morning.
Me
And
too.
I'm taking the time. I'm not distracted. And there are times I just sit down and just kind of look at something. And I'm just like, you know what? That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you have to take a step back to appreciate what you're doing, I think.
It's mindful meditation.
Yeah.
Right? Mindfulness seems to be a topic. Meditation's hard to just sit there and do nothing. But if it's mindfulness,
Yeah. I think for me, I've had to the reason I've kind of tried all these, different racing disciplines in the last, 5 to 6 years has been hunting for that kind of emotion or that feeling.
Does
And
anything give you that anymore?
today? Yeah. I mean, but it's one of those things that's hard to plan. It's like I can't come in tomorrow morning and be like, I need to do this so that I feel a certain way. It just has to happen. You know what I mean? And, if I went to a racetrack and I smelled two-stroke, I would feel it right now.
well, that's why I'm.
You know what I mean?
Spoiler alert. That's why I'm bringing a bike to.
Yeah, bring the two-stroke, dude. That's what
I'm going to bring an open can of fuel and just set it next to the bike,
Yeah,
and
for
anyone can come in and just a little bit of dip.
Yeah,
What was
that's
your cologne called?
Oh, afterburn. Yeah, side tangent. When I was a kid, I'm like $1 million idea for motorcycle enthusiasts only, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I would basically take, back in the day, 2-stroke motor oil, usually Maxima 927. Mm-hmm. It's a castor oil, so it
Castor
burns a
oil,
little
yeah.
thicker, but for some reason, it gives such
had
a
a certain
unique smell.
smell.
And I would basically do that and add a little bit more oil so the viscosity was higher, and then put it into a cologne bottle. It's perfect. You smell like you're at the racetrack. Well, the 8-year-old me didn't realize what pure gasoline does to skin. So afterburn was kind of a double entendre, as
Sure.
Casey likes to say.
Yep.
So
How did the women like it?
you know,
Not so much. It didn't work like you thought it was going to.
maybe I was a little gun shy back in the day. Maybe it was the mullet that I had. I
Yeah.
don't really remember, but I thought I was handsome. I thought I smelled great.
Hey, it
You know?
worked. I mean, confidence is
Yeah,
part of
that's
it,
it.
right? If
Right.
you feel good, you look good,
Oh,
right?
but it was Anchorman all the way, right?
right.
It smells
made
like
with
pure
bits of-
gasoline.
yeah, made with bits of real Panther, so you know
Yeah.
it's not every great idea is a successful venture, but the thought was important.
You know,
to me.
the Klotz makes a
the
candle.
candle. Bought it from my
Really?
dad years ago.
Yeah, it's awesome. Such a good idea.
Burn it, and it's kind of a 2-stroke. Yeah, it's just, but again, that's nostalgia, right? You're
Right.
trying to tap into the senses and have a somatic experience.
Yeah.
And I think riding, for me personally, and I know a lot of people would probably share this opinion, but riding a motorcycle specifically, a mountain bike sometimes, but riding a motorcycle of any discipline is one of the very few times in my life that I am 100% in the moment. And outside distractions do not seem to weigh as heavy on my mind. One, because physically it can't. If I'm distracted, if I'm thinking about
Is
taxes,
it, and
something.
I'm just curious, is this off-road or
Both.
on-road?
Both. I mean, sometimes when you're cruising on road, you can kind of sit back and relax. And you
Yeah,
start
that's
to-
where I struggle.
You get
like
mind
if,
wander.
If you're just cruising down I-15 or maybe down the highway,
If it's a monotonous ride,
things start to come in to your head
they
Yeah.
do, right?
and take you out of the moment.
Which can happen.
But I feel like
Off-road-
I'm not distracted when I'm there. Like maybe those things that are coming into my mind, that being on a motorcycle gives me the space to think about it. But I think
Whether it's something you want to think about or not.
exactly, like I
It's
have
just
the
giving
time
you the
to
time to
yeah,
process.
I'm there
It's
with
open
my
forum.
thoughts because we do road trips, we ride stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's for whatever reason, it's like after about 200 miles, I'm in a different headspace,
Yeah.
and things are just different, and there's
Do you
a lot
find
of,
yourself in a more creative space at that time?
kind of just maybe more thinking about life stuff that I need to
Okay.
address. I'm a pretty distracted person with as much like that I have going
Mm-hmm.
on. And so being on a bike, it's like the purest, most alone time, not distracted. And it gives me a space to like think and be by myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Outside of maybe silence, right? I would say Mother Nature is definitely the quickest way for me to ground myself.
Yeah.
I can go out in nature. I mean, I grew up in Wyoming, so there's still a little bit of redneck in me. Can't get rid of that. But to walk barefoot in the grass, to walk barefoot in sand, to play in the dirt, right? Someone asked me the other day, they're like, if you could go back to your childhood and what would you be doing right now? Mm-hmm. Closed my eyes and I was like, probably playing in the dirt.
Yeah.
It's not glamorous, but that grounding effect that nature has, or being out in the mountains or something else, like that is probably the fastest way for me to disconnect and get back inside. Second only to that would be riding a bike.
Riding.
Yeah, if I'm not trying to mindfully just sit and block all the quietness out, because that's hard to do in today's age where we're constantly bombarded. If I can get on a bike and I can release a couple minutes into the ride, if I'm up the canyon, something else, my nervous system relaxes, I seem to settle, and I enjoy simply being there.
Sure.
You know, but to your point, if you're on the freeway and it's just I'm commuting in traffic, okay, maybe not. Something's
You
going to
start
come
thinking
up.
about, oh, I got a deadline. I got to get this done. I got to get that done. And it kind of takes you out of the,
Yeah, the joy of riding a bike.
a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
But-
and I mean, just depending on, for me, if I'm going to hop on the Harley and head down the freeway, it's probably not going to be one of those times. But if I'm going to go hit the canyon, it can be.
So I don't commute on motorcycles, so I don't really experience that. Like the monotonous or like just the
I don't
the base.
commute either.
So
I should.
you should.
I should. Well, I mean, I always tell my wife that I need to buy another bike and I'll use it and it'll save gas money.
100%.
Yeah, you
right?
should.
You
then,
know,
in
and
that
she's
case.
like, okay, and then I never do.
Well, I mean, it just feeds into the truth of the magical number or the math equation for how many bikes a person should have. It's
Yeah.
always n plus 1, n is the number of bikes you currently have.
Yeah.
So if it's for commuting, you're like, well, obviously I need one more.
Right. So,
I think
but yeah,
that's
I
sound.
should. But yeah, I think for me, off-road has always been the ultimate detach. You know what I mean? Because
You're so engaged.
when you're riding off-road, I mean, and I'm talking like a motocross track or,
Even
dune
desert,
riding, desert
sand,
riding,
rut
whatever,
tracks.
single track. There's no space in your head for anything but what's right in front of you.
You can't, right? Something can jump up and bite you.
Sure.
Literally, a rock could fling over, correct rim. Like something could happen at any moment, which I think is part of the risk we take intentionally. But it's the challenge. It's the exploration. There is adventure to be had. And even if you're not jumping something and you're in a race, I think that's why the adventure bike market is becoming so popular now, because a lot of people in a certain age range, it's not that they forgot who they were. They're trying to reconnect with that youthful experience of going out with their buddies, building
Yeah.
a jump, finding a place to make a little rut track, and they think it's the coolest thing in the world. So now they have money to invest in bigger bikes to go explore and to detach.
Just detach from life and become a kid again, isn't it? Is it?
Yeah.
Isn't
you can
that
feel
what
like,
it
does
is?
anyone else have chills? Like my whole body can
Yeah.
viscerally feel
For sure.
why we need that.
I felt like childlike fun was had by myself, at least on that road trip we did. And I urge people to go out and do longer road trips on bikes, because with motorcycles, there's so many different things for me, at least, that's rewarding. Building them, searching for them, looking for parts,
Customizing them.
riding them, but off-road, canyon rides, road trips, like there's so many things that I find enjoyable, but road trips are usually the things that I look back on the most and like remember things from.
Sure.
Every-
I haven't
every
felt
day.
that way on a Harley for a long time. Or I don't know that I have ever felt, I'll even go this far. I don't think on a Harley I've ever felt like it's taken me back to childhood until last summer, and we did our camp out.
Oh, cool. Where'd you go?
We went out to Flaming Gorge.
That's where I'm from. Green River.
It looked muddy from the pictures.
It rained the whole way there.
Oh boy. Did you take I-80 to get there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Well,
So
80,
Evans-
84.
But then
And
you
then
jumped on
80
80 to Evanston,
to Evanston.
to Green River, and then to Manila.
Not
over?
to Green River.
You went to Mountain View, and then you went through that way.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Which is good. That
And
way.
it rained the entire time, right? And we were on the Wyoming side, so we got to Manila and went north.
Oh, yeah.
What was the name of that?
Dutch John.
Anvil Draw.
I know exactly where you're at. You're just above the cliff drops at Lost Dog. That's cool. Sorry, that's where I grew up. So
Okay.
I'm picturing the
Yeah,
clay
so-
and the shale that you had to ride through to get down the road through the sagebrush.
So the road, we could not ride down the road.
No.
It was too slick.
No.
You touched it and the bike went out from underneath you.
It's grease.
So Brainiac over here, which was actually, it worked out great, figured out if we ride next to the road in the sagebrush,
Yeah.
and it's more sandy and there's, vegetation and stuff, we could actually get to camp. It was probably a mile, maybe two,
To get down to
to
the
the
water.
camp, because we camped down on the water.
Yep.
Right. And I'm on a bike that, if I had to replicate, it's $50,000-$60,000 motorcycle.
Sure. Oh,
in the
in the
mud, in this clay.
in Wyoming clay.
And
Was it like packing up into the fenders and everything?
we had to remove my fender because it packed in my fender so hard that it locked up
It's
my front
breaking
wheel.
it up. Yeah.
Oh,
It
no
locked
kidding.
up my front wheel.
As you're trying to get down that stuff
Yeah.
to water.
Yeah. It was like probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. But that whole weekend, I just felt like a kid again.
Tell me more about that. So you make the long haul to get there. It's rainy. What was going through your mind initially where you're like, what are we doing?
Yeah, when we're blasting up I-80, when we get to Evanston and we're like parked under the canopy at the gas station, just like trying to wait out the rain. We had my van kind of
Like a chase vehicle.
a chase vehicle, but
support.
we had gotten separated, and all my rain gear was in the van. But the van was, I can't remember if she was behind us or ahead of us.
Oh boy.
So I'm just like in a hoodie, and like my boots are full of water. And it's like, it's not that it was cold, it's just you're wet.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't freezing because it was midsummer, but it, you know, it was, I think it was June. So, I mean, it wasn't cold. It just, you know, when you're wet and it's riding, you know, you're riding, it's not.
Not the
But
most
anyways,
enjoyable.
so like riding up there for a little while, you're like, man, was this really a good idea? You know?
I'm sure you felt a lot of pressure too, kind of organizing it.
Yeah, I mean, because we had partnered with some of the other shops, you know, and we were kind of
So
leading
this is a bigger deal.
Yeah,
Not
I mean,
just you and a couple
no,
people.
this is something that we put on. Our Intermountain V-Twin camp out. We kind of partnered with like 3 or 4 other shops.
Okay.
To kind of like create an event where you come ride with the people from the shop and camp with us, and it's an event that we put on. But when we get there, it's not an event.
No,
we're not.
You're
setting
just a
up
camp out.
We're not setting up, you know, a
Vendor
booth
station,
or
yeah.
vendor. Like, there's no vendors. We got there and everybody just pitched a tent, and we had a food truck come out and serve food, and we partied all night. And so that was the gist of it. But like, it was just such one of those spontaneous kind of like, you're a kid playing in the mud and you have no care in the world. Even though I'm, you know, destroying a $50,000 motorcycle, I really didn't even care in the moment
Yeah.
because we were just having fun. And I hadn't felt that way on a Harley probably ever. There's other emotions that the Harley does for me, but taking me back to childhood has never really been its purpose. But in that weekend, it did.
That's cool.
It wasn't planned. It just
No.
happened that way.
Which, I mean, you're smiling as you're telling this story.
Yeah.
So like, you're taking me to that place that you're at in your mind.
Yeah.
Which is, it's special not only because you got to experience it for yourself, but there seems to be that collective energy when you're in moments like that where other people feel it too, and everyone looks back and says the same. Hey, you remember that time?
Yeah.
What a shit show.
We
Wasn't
had-
that a fun
yeah.
shit show?
It was a shit show on the shed run. The shed run, that's what my friend Parker puts on each year. And it's just a group of friends that he invites out. I love him to death. I think him not being good at planning a trip is what makes those trips so much fun.
Sure.
Because the first one,
Who wants everything to go smooth?
it does.
I mean,
it
you
does,
do before the trip,
right?
but then after the trip, you're like, that was perfect because it was chaos. We had to chase down so and so. We had to
Fix a tire.
Whatever.
Lost a tire.
So we had one guy with us that didn't even have a blanket or a change of clothes. He's riding on an absolute death trap of a motorcycle. There weren't brake lights. The headlight aimed up to the sky, and we're riding on the coast.
The throttle cable was intact. He had brakes.
I don't think he had no front brakes.
no front brake.
But there was still a rotor and a caliper on his front end. It just wasn't hooked up.
Yeah, he looked the part.
But
He was missing a few critical items.
they roll up to our camp spot, and it's pretty late at night.
So dark.
And he literally just put his sunglasses on and laid down on the lawn and went to bed because he didn't have a change of clothes, no pillow, nothing.
And we woke up, and guess how we found him? With
Exact
his
same
sunglasses
position.
on, passed
Same
out
spot?
on a tarp, nothing over him, just laying in his clothes. And I remember walking up, and I don't know why I wanted to throw Cheetos at him or something.
The squirrels were throwing pine cones
Oh, that's
at
what
him.
it was. Okay, sorry. It was, the squirrels. But he didn't move.
Yeah.
And, like, we tap him, I could feel over his mouth. I'm like, he's breathing.
He's alive.
But that's one of those things where, you know,
Dude was out.
it was a shit show and it wasn't going well, but that's something that I look back and remember and think fondly about.
Right?
Well, and those are the ones we talk about it a lot. Those are the trips that you always talk about. You know what I mean? We don't really ever talk about or come home and tell the stories of the trips where everything
Went good. Yeah.
I mean, how fun is it to tell a story of like, oh yeah, we arrived in, you know, this place right on time and the hotel got us right in and nobody broke.
There's nothing
like,
to talk
that's
about.
not fun.
It went to plan.
It's like this dude who was on a death trap and no gear and
He's never ridden a motorcycle. He had like
Oh, yeah, that's right. This was his first
a small
bike.
scooter that he would put around on in the summer. And the first bike they put him on, it was so low to the ground it wouldn't sit on its side stand.
This was the old Sporty.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember.
I know a
what
few
year it
bikes
was.
like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the bike came from. Like Parker just it was like, yeah, I've got a bike
found him
that
a
you can
bike.
ride. It was sketchy though. It was really sketchy.
Most of a bike.
Yeah, but I give the guy credit for it. Not only being willing to just give it a shot.
Sure.
I looked at it and I'm thinking, this thing's janky as hell. Would I step foot? No, probably not. Right? I'd roll it into a garage to get worked on. But he seemed to not only have no fear, but it was
Smile on
that
his face.
childlike curiosity and a little bit of social peer pressure to say, hey, we're going to do something cool. You want to be involved? And he's like, yeah, but I don't have the resources. So someone else stepped up and said, I got a bike. I don't know what that means. Sign me up. And that seemed to be his can-do attitude, which he got through it and he had a lot of fun. I just kept looking at him like, you got a helmet? You know,
Right.
Kind of parent mode. But it was what's the definition? Energy without direction is chaos. Sometimes that gives me a lot of anxiety
Yeah.
because I like to know what's going on.
Sure.
In those moments, that chaos is what makes the memory so special.
Yeah.
Because no one really knows what's going to happen next, and that is the adventure.
Yeah.
And everyone survived, and it ended up working out, but there were just a series of things along the way that big question marks. But you almost have to problem solve in real time. And thankfully, I was with good people that have more mechanical skills than I do. So if something happened, I'm like, I'll be okay.
Sure.
But they're also good people that are just willing to have a good time and say, well, that didn't go a plan. We're going to pivot and we're going to make something work, right? You got to work through all those group dynamics.
Yeah.
So it's just fun. You're like, it could have ended up worse. It could have ended up better, but it was what it was, and you accept it.
Yeah. And that's kind of how that camp out was for us. It was anything but perfect, but it was, looking back, it was just perfect, you know?
So cool.
And so, yeah, those are the trips that really, you know, reset you, remind you of why you do this stuff, why you enjoy it.
Man, and that's a big one. Going back to your point about you hadn't had that experience on a Harley specific,
Yeah.
right? And not one brand's better than the other. They all have different disciplines and places that make them what they are. But typically when you're on a Harley, because you do the bagger race series, right? You're racing these big things that typically were never on a racetrack.
Right.
Totally modifying it for something out of its normal element.
Yeah.
Which I think is awesome. And anyone I talk to, they're like, man, those guys are nuts. And I'm like, yeah, that's what makes it exciting.
Yeah.
That being said, what has been your typical experience over the years on a Harley, and how do you find new ways to still enjoy riding, even if it's on a different bike, or you come back to the shop and you're like, okay, I'm around V-twins again. Where do you find your little bit of inspiration, or what rekindles your love for Harleys and big V-twins?
I've always loved racing, right? Racing's always been, I've always circled back to racing. When I got into the Harley world, it wasn't because they're race bikes, you know what I mean?
Nope.
There was another culture that attracted me, or a lifestyle, or a freedom, you know.
What was your first bike then? First Harley?
First Harley?
Yeah.
Was a 2002 Road King.
Road King.
Okay, you went big.
Lowered, 16-inch ape hangers, you know what I mean?
Which is, you said, a different appeal. So what was the appeal then of getting that bike? Was it the low and slow? Or
Low and slow, the
group riding?
style, or, you know, or...
Okay.
Was it like aesthetics that grabbed you first about the bike?
Yeah. And I don't know what it is. I think I've talked about it on the podcast in the past. I don't know why. I remember I have this very vivid memory. I was probably 12.
Okay.
At that time in my life, I was racing RC cars.
Oh, gas
You know
powered,
what I mean?
electric?
Electric.
Attaboy.
I was riding, like my family, we were riding ATVs. You know, we had Yamahas, Hondas and stuff, ATVs. That's really like where I was at that time in my life. I went to Walmart. Could have been Kmart, I don't remember. But it was
Kmart.
something like that, you know what I mean?
Right.
And there's this Harley t-shirt hanging on the rack, just the Bar and Shield Harley logo. And I had to have it. And I don't even know why.
You're just like, that's cool.
That's cool, and I had to buy that. And I had to beg my mom to buy me the shirt. She bought me the shirt. I wore it to school, and I don't know why.
Did she know what it was?
I mean, she knew of the brand,
Okay, right. Sometimes
but
your
she's,
parents would be
I think
like,
she's
yeah,
just
okay.
like, I don't know, it's just a, you know, It's just because it was like a long sleeve, like sweat, not a hoodie, but like a sweatshirt.
Sweatshirt.
Like a crew neck or
Yeah.
whatever.
It's black with the orange badging.
Yeah, that's it. And I just had to have it.
love it
And then
for no
fast
reason.
forward, like I never really did, even at that point, like never, Harleys weren't in my life at that point. I progressed, we progressed from like ATVs into, I got a motocross bike. I started racing motocross, started riding a lot of desert, on my bike. And then, years later, my dad bought a Harley. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, I do like these, it might like
The sound.
the sound,
the rumble.
the trips that he was doing with friends, and I don't, as corny as it sounds, like back in those days, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, I mean, he's wearing these like cut off, frayed denim shirts, and the skull cap helmet and the leather boots and the chain wallets. And I'm just like, that's cool. And I was just so attracted to it for some reason. And I played that part for a long time. And it was fun.
Yeah.
But then working in the industry, I kind of got, I don't want to say stale. I kind of like,
Does your style get refined or what you're interested in? Because
I think racing kind of came back into it.
it looks like it
So
if you look out there.
So kind of a fusion then?
Yeah.
Like you're not leaving the Harley world.
No.
But you're not
I'm just
racing,
finding my place in it, I think.
Okay. You know me with movie quotes and song quotes. I'm always going to bring something up. This one's neither, but just a quote in general. Bruce Lee, right? Mm-hmm. Master of his craft in many ways. Smart guy. One of my favorite quotes by him, and I take it to heart anytime I'm building something or anytime I'm trying to make it my own. Mm-hmm. He said, no matter what you're doing, if you're making your own martial arts, your own business, your own bike in this case, absorb what is useful, disregard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. So anytime I build a bike and someone asks, hey, are you building a replica? No. I'm building a tribute bike. If it's something based on someone else's life,
Sure.
right? And it's not 100% my own, which is tough to do. The concept of a tribute gives me creative liberties to infuse my own personality, hence rock and roll, hence the names, right? There's got to be a little bit of flair. So if I'm not next to my bike, someone's going to damn well know, oh, that's a Luczak bike. How do you know? Check that out. It's a little rock and roll something, right? But I absorb what's useful, and the beauty of where I'm at now, I wouldn't say I'm a master builder by any means, but I get to look at people I know that are building bikes for shows. I get to look at influences of new people that are still in the scene, racing or running shops, and then ask questions, right? If I humble myself enough to go and say, hey, I want to upgrade my brakes. A customer can come to you and ask the same question, but for me building a bike, I'm like, what works? Instead of reinventing the wheel, which I've tried before because I didn't know any different, I can go and just say, what's the best of the best out there? And then I start to ask, well, what's my budget? I ask those other questions, but then I go and I say, okay, this is all well and great, but some of it seems overkill or it seems gimmicky. So I'm going to strip all that down, and I want to find the best of what works without all the selling points.
Sure.
Right? And then I need to figure out, how would I do it? So let's take, for example, calipers, right? I noticed you had some really nice blue Behringer master cylinders and some stuff on the race bike out there, which I think is killer because it accents the bike. But I also know it's made of billet. I noticed your levers were not just the stock ones that come, like you're doing different size levers, there's different shapes. Even the tower, the plunger size is bigger. Like I'm paying attention to all of this. And then I look down and I see they're blue, but a blue ties in with the color scheme that seems to be, a draw for you and the company, right? There's blue everywhere.
Kind of blue all over. Yeah, you look around, which is weird because blue was never really my color. It just worked that way.
Which is great, right? But you're taking a product that works very well, and it doesn't have to be super flashy. It's not that the color is flash, but the flair then comes in of like, I'm going to tie in a splash of blue.
Yeah.
Why not? So if anyone looks at the bike and they ask those questions, they would know it's like, that's a Tony Tucker build right there. And I think that is what speaks because there's a story behind it versus someone that builds a bike and they just throw a bunch of money at it. You got high-end stuff, but like there's no story. To me, that's boring. You spend a lot of money, no story. Some guy builds a garage bike, not a lot of performance stuff, but you see all the labor that went into it and everything meant something, and they're doing the best with what they know. that's sold. Like
Yeah.
that's the bike right there.
Not always. A lot of the times that I go to shows, my favorite bikes are in the parking lot. They're the bikes that
Yeah.
people rode to the show. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I kind of think that people that are just doing it for the love of it, a lot of the time you can see that in the end result.
Yeah.
And I don't think that you need a big amount of technical ability to work on a bike and end up with a great built motorcycle. I think if you have a vision in your head and you can figure out a way with your whatever technical ability you have to get that out, like I think that that's just as much of a win as some highly engineered, ridiculous bike. And I think that every bike has something to offer. And I really don't think that there's one motorcycle that's like cooler than another one. If I like a certain bike, it doesn't mean that it's a good bike. I like funky stuff.
Yeah, I give him 10 out of 10 for
funky.
eccentric.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
super fun.
Which is colors, styling, asymmetric, anything.
Mm-hmm. But each time I build a motorcycle, I don't want to do the same thing twice. And so even if it is within my style, I try not to do it. And I don't know why I do that, but like I don't want to build another Sportster now
Two
because
of the same thing.
yeah. But I probably will. But yeah, I really like to jump around in that regard.
Well, I mean, I think it shows itself. I mean, how many different motorcycles do you have in your shop right now? I mean,
How many would you say? I mean,
20?
brand, make, model alone, there's different ones. But even if it's the same brand, like the two Harleys that are in there are completely different.
yeah.
So the oldest bikes are like late 60s, and the newest bike is a 2023.
And Italian, Japanese, American.
And there's
which is
different
fun.
things I like about
British.
each thing
one.
and each era. The Triumph Bonneville, it's a 1976.
That Steve McQueen bike.
I got it from the original owner with like
Original paint on the tank.
1,200
Great shape.
miles on it. So he rode the bike for one summer. He was highway patrol. He saw
this
some
was the guy that
accidents.
we were
This guy hooked me up on this deal.
Forgot about
It
that.
took me
I was looking
2
out for
years
him.
of calling this guy before he gave it.
He wouldn't let
he
it
would
go?
let me get it.
Retired sheriff.
And Spence calls him up and makes it happen.
Well,
He ate breakfast
my
with
dad,
him.
my dad eats breakfast at this little place in Salt Lake called Over the Counter. Right, it's kind of those dive place. People are super nice, right? And a lot of police officers and retired sheriffs will go there and eat in the morning. And being from Wyoming, my dad's kind of that guy where if you want to know what the news is in town, you go to the gas station or the coffee shop or the
I
little
love
cafe,
that. Yeah,
and
that's-
that's where you get all the news. That's like how our tracks in Colville, or not Wanship rather. If you want to know what's going on, you got to go to the gas station early in the morning because all the farmers are coming in to get
Their
their
hats
coffee
and everything.
And that's where you get the news. So he's in there. A gentleman's talking. I don't know if he mentioned bikes, and my dad said, "Oh, my dad's humble, and I love that about him." But he said, "Oh, my son builds bikes." Well, what he didn't tell people is my dad's first career was racing.
yeah.
He didn't mention any of that. He just said, "Oh, my son builds bikes." And then some other guy in the corner's like, "Yeah, I follow him on Instagram. He builds those two-stroke bikes." So then the guy piped up and was like, "Well, I got this cool Triumph, yada, yada, yada." And the next thing I know, my dad comes home and is like, "Hey, this guy has a bike. I don't know if he's looking to get rid of it, but he gave me your contact and said to come look at it in case you wanted to do something with it." Well, I didn't have the funds or the time, but then we had a conversation shortly thereafter, and I said, "Hey, I might have a bike for you." So I passed the info to Casey, and I told the guy, "Look, I may not be able to do something with the bike, but I know someone worthy of the bike." And then he persisted for 2 years to convince
Made
the
it
guy.
happen.
Because
I would call him every few months. And I'm like, "Hey, Mike, it's me again." And he was like, "The answer's still no, Casey. Like, I'll talk to you in
no.
like 3 months."
Hard no.
Yeah. There were family members kind of fighting over getting this bike too.
Oh, really?
He took the tank off, drained it, put it inside, chucked a sheet over the bike, and it sat.
30 years?
Yeah.
40 years, however long?
What is? And it just sits in that condition now.
I mean, the bike, it looks damn good. I got it back on the road, tires,
Kinda
did a
just
full
got it
service
running.
on it. I did my touches on there, but in a way where I'm not damaging the originality of the bike.
Sure.
I damaged a much more valuable bike to get parts off of. I have a Kawasaki H1, the triple two-stroke.
Such a cool bike.
Yeah.
And I took the fenders off of that and then used those fenders and modified them and put them on the Triumph Bonneville, so I wasn't messing with the Bonneville because
It looks great.
I could have it back to like original condition in a weekend, but it suits me more now. And a bike like that, I don't know if you can have that much soul in a newer motorcycle. Like when you're riding and you kind of develop this relationship where, you know, there's no rev limiter. And so maybe you start backing off and you figure out where valve float kicks in or something like that. And like the way it sounds, like there's a little bit more smoke puffing out of this exhaust pipe than this one. And like it's temperamental and like it's a two-way relationship with those older bikes. And I really like that. But then I also like being able to hop on the Pan America. The idea of being able to hop on it and not worry about reliability issues.
Yeah.
But
The trade-off.
I mean, you have it's an RD, right? Or RZ?
it's an RD.
RD.
I would love an
Love
RZ
an RZ.
350.
I would
Or
love one, man.
yeah,
I want
build
one
a flat
so
tracker
bad.
out of that.
the list of bikes that I want is way bigger than the bikes that I have already.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you have that RD. You have, is it a CB?
So
do you have a CB?
I can go through pretty quickly. So 1969 Kawasaki H1 triple. That was an original
I'd say
bike.
that's the coolest one, but I think the RD's cooler.
I'm so pumped on the RD
it's
right
gonna
now. So 76 Triumph Bonneville. It's the T140. I've got another Triumph Chopper. I forgot. I bought a Triumph Chopper. The Pan America, which I do love that bike. That thing rips, and you take it off road.
Gnarly bike.
Then I've got the 86 FXR. The Sportster.
Painted in a very subtle teal.
I always think like I'm gonna do like something subtle, like I don't want it to pop, and I'm
It's
just
not you.
I'm naive and ignorant because it ends up being the opposite of what I
Yeah.
envision. That bike's name is Pokey, and so I painted it the color. I painted it the color of Gumby, and then I named it Pokey
Pokey.
because that was my like favorite TV show growing up as a kid. And so I was thinking like, hey, Pokey's his horse, like this is my horse.
Yeah. But Gumby color.
Yep. Then I've got another build. Its name is JJ the Baby,
JJ baby.
which is an 86 XL 600R,
Okay.
Basically like the Baja desert racing bike.
but turned into a street tracker.
Oh, okay.
Lowered, inverted forks, 17-inch wheels.
It has suspension off of a BMW S1000RR on there, the monoshock, which is pretty weird.
That one will be cool.
Then, what? I know there's other bikes I'm forgetting right now. Oh, CB750, the
Okay.
Honda.
I thought I remember you having a CB.
Yep. I sold one recently.
What year was that one again, the CB?
It's a 76.
Okay.
So it's the single overhead cam one.
Okay.
And there's a second one at my shop that we're building for a customer right now.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's just been put in the corner for like 2 years.
Then the sporty, the purple Sportster.
Purple Sportster, which you helped me out a lot with.
Dude, the machining on that tail end with the oil.
The oil
reserve coming
bag,
back,
yeah.
I would have loved to have done that on my Sportster when I had it. That was so clean.
It was fun. That's
I-
a project that, gets me excited, stuff like that.
It's labor of love. Like
Yeah.
you could tell just by the welds. I'm
on,
like, wow.
on that
that's
note,
time.
I looked at that and I can't really remember what I paid, but I felt I was getting a very good value because it seemed like one of those projects that kind of you went after, like when I do jobs like that for my business, I usually end up not making money.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for it because somebody's like, hey, kind of go crazy or like do this. And I remember when I got that Sportster, I just bought it to help a friend out. And then it's like, oh, we'll just have like a shitty bike that somebody can rip around. And then it's like, well, let's build a stunt bike. And then it's like, no, let's build an off-road Sportster. And then kind of got a direction that we wanted to do something different with it. And then came to you for the oil bag, as well as finishing up the tail section. And it set the tone for the entire build because I'm like, I can't let this other person's work fall short because of what I'm doing. Like he kind of set the bar and now I just have to keep going in this direction. And for me on that build, I definitely like lost control.
It can happen real easy, right?
Yeah. not as much just like a financial thing, but a time thing.
Yeah.
It was the amount of time I put in on that bike. It was crazy.
In a short period
Short
of time.
period of time.
To
Yeah.
make the Moto 1 show, the One Moto show. Why do I always get it backwards? What is it?
One moto.
One moto.
One Moto. Okay. One of these days, Al. But yeah, in order to meet a deadline, and whenever he would consult. But yeah, the first time I saw your handiwork on that bike, I looked down and was like, shit.
Yep.
It turned out super cool.
I think
I
so.
mean,
It did.
I look at it and critique it, as we always do
Yeah,
with our
of
own
course.
work, right?
But I've never seen something like that, especially on a Sportster.
Mm-hmm.
But even just how it developed the theme of the bike, where then he took his vision.
Yeah.
And I was grateful to have a small bit of consulting advice when he said, hey, you always go all out. Like, what else would you do? And the first thing I said was titanium.
Yeah.
Right. So I talked to my titanium vendor and I was like, hey, would you mind helping us out on a discount? And we didn't do the full bike in tie. But again, it just added those little bits. So when you looked at things and you could see a dimpled titanium bolt versus a standard bolt,
Yeah. It just,
you know, the whole thing has to be cohesive. And that's really hard to do without going all out on the whole thing. At what
Sure.
point do you stop?
You don't.
And that is, I think, as a builder, in my opinion, is one of those hard things to do. Once you start building it, you're like, where are my limits? And for what reason? Like, when do I make a call? And you go past a point very quickly of logic is now out the window, and any rational decision, or my financial advisor who's probably going to slap me after this and be like, what are you doing?
yeah.
Well, my Roth IRA is now drained, and I'm really proud
I have
of what
a
I
really
just
cool
made.
motorcycle
Yeah,
in
I
the
was like,
garage.
check that out, right? I was like, that looks so cool. Which just happened. The bike that I'll be bringing, I'm like, that was one of them. But it was, not to derail that, but that was a point of mental sanity, and I needed a creative outlet to keep me here.
Yeah.
So if someone would have asked, why do you keep going? I'm like, I don't have a good answer for you, but I feel it inside, so I'm not going to stop.
Yeah, that's
And your
like when you're
Sportster was kinda-
questioning, you're like, why am I doing this? And it goes way beyond like logic and reason. And at a certain point, and I think that we had like a lot of conversations about this, the best thing, maybe not the best thing, but you know, if you feel this strongly about something, trust it. And there's that quote, if you have inspired thought, you have to act upon it and you have to trust it.
Yeah. Trying to lead that, especially as we get not older, but maybe more seasoned in different ways.
I do have a question for both of you.
Yeah.
What's your favorite part of the build process? Like, is it the planning phase, looking for parts? Is it the first start? Is it riding it for the first time?
Tony?
Oh, man.
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
Just one particular?
One
Or
part.
just like a highlight? Because for me, my favorite part is just doing the work. It's after the planning is done, and it's just when I have to put in the time. I'm actually a little bit bummed out when it's over.
when it's done. Mm-hmm. Did you play with Legos or building blocks as a kid?
Constantly. He was talking about playing in the
Did you-
dirt as a kid. I was playing with Legos.
That's how I was. But I just like to build.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't build it and then play with it. It's like I built it, and then
Built it.
when I was done, I was like, well, now what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, the building
It was the
was-
building part.
Yep.
The creativeness or
The planning's up there for me though too. Like
planning's fun and is cool. I think it's the moment in the planning or maybe early on in the build where like the final product hits your brain. And it like you're like,
Reveals it.
okay,
You can
this,
see it.
this is it. This is the end product. This is the final, like I can see it. Now I know where I'm going. And that could be in the planning phase or it could be early on in the build. It could be late in the build.
yeah, and I think that there are times that you don't necessarily know. You
What
could
it
be
looks like.
you could be into it pretty deep before you realize what you're doing. Well, just like that Sportster, my plans changed on that thing so many times. I think I got a dirt bike front end from you because
yeah.
I was gonna just.
Have you
make a
guys
dirt
ever
bike.
built a bike where you have like a rendering, like a drawing of the bike, and so you're kind of building, like like you can see it on a drawing. You know, they do it like that you see it like with cars and stuff. They'll draw,
foos.
they'll draw it and then they'll build the drawing.
one time?
I've
but
never done it.
It was
I've always
very
just
crude.
I've always just been like winging it.
Free flow.
I just start building something and ideas start coming as I start to work on it.
It was the GS 450. So Suzuki GS 450 was the first full build I ever did. Mm-hmm. You know that saying? It's like idle time is the devil's playground or something like that, or
Idle hands do the devil's work.
Devil's work. I just had too much free time and like I wanted to put it into something. And I was like, I'll buy whatever. It just needs to be cheap. I had like no money at the time, but I'm going to do everything to this thing. And I got a Suzuki GS 450, like an 80 or 83 for $50 on KSL. And that was my first build, like every nut and bolt, the entire motor completely rebuilt, like as far as you can disassemble a bike, that was disassembled. But I started by going on Google and I searched like GS 450 stencil or profile or outline. And it was basically the coloring book version of a rendering. And I used colored pencils. I still have the drawing and it looks identical to the bike that was finished. I actually have a picture holding up like a drawing that I did with colored pencils.
That's cool.
And I'm not good at drawing. It looks like a 6-year-old did it.
I've tried to like draw and I can't draw. So I'm like, screw this. I'm just going to go start building it. You know what I mean? Like, because I can't draw. Like I look at like you said, Chip Foose, and like he just sits down and like, you know, colored pencils
Or
and
Dave
paint.
Kindig.
Yeah. And they just draw out this beautiful drawing. I'm like, that's so cool. I wish I could do that just for the art part of it, right?
100%.
I can't do it. So I just go to work and start bolting stuff together.
So are you going more off of feeling then and less off of vision in that scenario? Because
Yeah.
I feel like for me, a lot of the time, it's weird. It's in that time between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. before the shop opens up. I will just sit down and look at a motorcycle and I kind of wait. It sounds weird, but I want the bike to tell me what it wants.
I don't think there's a right or wrong to that. Honestly, since we're talking kind of this artistic
I mean, it's an
realm.
art form, and so there's no wrong way to do it.
No.
It's just what works for you.
Do you do different approaches on different builds? Like maybe I'm going to approach this build in a completely different way, where maybe I want like hand-worked parts and I want to do everything on this one, or like I want this one to be a little bit rougher and this is how I'm going to approach it.
It could be, try this, see how this one lands, right? I look at art in many forms, but to me there are two types of artists, and I'm going to generalize this really hard. Two types of camps, okay? Regardless of if you're paint, color pencil, sculpting, you build a car, it doesn't matter. Two types of artists. One, they take a medium, they take an idea, they take something they can see, right? Like you said, do you take a photo and start from there? Or are you also in the other camp of completely from scratch? You have no muse in front of you, you have nothing to go on, and you start completely original and from scratch. Well, for me, as an art minor in college and an art student in high school, I struggled being able to see something in my mind without a reference point. But I have friends who could do the opposite. They don't like a reference. They can just, like Chip Foose, he just does it.
It just comes out.
And I was never that great at doing it. I needed something. So that, in my mind, put me into two places: Innovators and Inventors. An inventor is coming up with something from nothing, essentially. Even though everything's a remake, everything's pretty much already been made, they're inventing something new from pretty much nothing, theoretically. Innovators are most of us, where we take an idea and we twist it, right? We put our own spin on it. So are any one of us bike builders actually building a bike from the ground up? New chassis, new suspension, right? He shares articles all the time of guys back in the day with suspension ergonomics that I'm like, I've never seen or would have thought of that, and it never took off into production.
The Elf bike.
Yeah, the Elf bike, way ahead of its time, right? Or even cars. So speaking of music again, REO Speedwagon, the band, it's actually a car. It was a brand of car back in the day in like the 30s. They were the ones with the patent on adaptive headlights that would turn with the wheels.
Oh, yeah?
Well, guess who wants to shut that down? Other big manufacturers. And then speed up 80 years later, who has the patent on it now? I think it was Porsche or Audi that started doing it for modern cars, and that's where we have adaptive headlights now. But that came from a car in the 30s. And you would push-pull something in the back, and the spare wheel would come from the back and put itself down, and it would rotate the car to do parallel parking, and then the spare tire could come back up and sit on the back of the car. These are inventors coming up with something
New. Unthought of, unheard,
right?
never seen before.
Never seen. But the rest of us, not the rest of us, but a good chunk, will take something and then you close your eyes and we modify it to do something else. And I don't think either one of those are inherently bad. I don't think one's smarter. I don't think one's better.
Just
but for me
different.
personally, when you ask the question...
Well, you kind of need both to evolve, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
because the first iteration of it, it's great,
but it's
but
limited.
everybody else is going to fine tune it and make it even better.
Right. So if someone blueprints a motor, they take the same motor, like going back to dirt bikes, the YZ250 was kind of the quintessential two-stroke 250 motor. Well, Suzuki in the early 2000s, I wouldn't say copied it, even though a lot of people just say it's the same motor. They copied it, but they modified, I think, the power valve and a couple other parts to refine it. And then they made a chassis that worked better with the motor characteristics. So if anyone asks what was one of the best handling dirt bikes of all time, two strokes, an RM250, which is what I'm bringing to the show. And that...
What year range?
So if you went from like 2000 to 2005, because you had Travis Pastrana and then moving into Ricky Carmichael, who won the last title in motocross on a two-stroke,
06.
was the 05 Supercross. And then the summer, he switched to a 450, and that's when four-stroke technology completely wiped everything out.
Took over.
Yeah, but he was the last one to win a title on a two-stroke, and then it was kind of the end of an era. And there's a lot of history I have that I'll explain on my bike that I'm bringing, why specifically 05. But the way the bike handles, the turning characteristics, you could not beat it. But the motor was also super strong, but it was essentially a Yamaha YZ250.
A refined YZ.
Right. So did Suzuki break the bank and blow people's minds? No, they took something that worked really well, and they saw how they could make it better. And then what they did was make something that handled better. And so the complete package is what then made it so great.
Yeah.
So as far as when you ask the question, like, how do you do that? Typically, it's not that I'm copying someone else's bike, but I'm looking for influences that I think, when you mentioned the Harley t-shirt, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it's cool, but it resonates with me. And then something inside says, put it out there. And then it starts forming as it goes. And I'm like, the colors might change the shape, but I'm like, how do I, or is this too much? Throw it away. Now I'm overthinking it. And then I scrap that idea. And so the bike I'm bringing took 6 years to build because it went through different iterations, because I would get to a point where it was almost finished and I'd look at it and I'm like, that's not it. And then I would unravel half the bike or the whole bike and then start it back up and tear it back down and then go, and to a point where it's like, that's it. But I did see that in the beginning. Sometimes I do, but I don't know how to get there. It's like I can see it in the distance and I'm like, I'm trying to get there, but there is no roadmap.
Right.
And so you're kind of bouncing off, I call it bowling without bumpers. It's another life Spencerism.
All right.
Right? There's no shame in using bumpers unless you're in a competitive league and that's cheating, right? But every kid, when you take a kid to go bowling and they're trying to have some fun, if you didn't have bumpers up for them to start, they're going to throw it in the gutter and get frustrated and they're going to stop. And it's not like the bumpers are cheating and it's not that they can't do it. All you want them to do as a parent or a coach or someone else, metaphor for life, is to get in the game, throw the damn ball. Even if you throw it the wrong angle, it will course correct you
Self-correct.
to hit something. And then from there, you take that information to say, that didn't work quite so well. Maybe I need to go a little bit more this way. And then eventually, we take the bumpers off, and you learn that making a mistake, you'll get the ball back, you can try again, but you have to throw it in the gutter to really learn the lesson of don't throw to the side. But the bumpers initially is the universe's way of saying, throw the ball, give it a shot, get in the game.
Keep going.
Yeah, you don't learn if you don't engage.
Yeah.
This isn't necessarily a comment on that. I'm curious if there's an intermission because I have to pee.
Go for it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I've been holding.
We'll continue. Yeah.
Let her flow,
I should have said that before. You know, if you need to, go ahead.
Happens.
Man, it's getting deep in here.
Yeah, I
can see why you
I never shy away from it.
coach.
I love it. I wouldn't say I'm the best at it by any means, but I never got into coaching because I thought I would be a good coach. I love sharing. I love educating. I love facilitating anything within a person to watch their light bulb turn on.
Yeah.
Right? As I think a lot of us do, we get gratification from doing something well and someone else responds to it. Right? There's a selfish ask all the time. Even like volunteer service, we're just doing something kind for someone else. It's never 100% altruistic, meaning it's never 100% for that person. We always get something in return. You do something kind for someone else and you feel good, take it, accept it.
Right.
Right? So coaching, it gives me an avenue to not only share my views or my knowledge, but also work with someone in the process. And I get to watch them, just like building a bike. I'm watching the person grow, which is kind of fun because that teaches me a lot to say, wow, was I that stubborn? Was I that accepting? How well am I listening? And so it's teaching me a lot as I'm watching people respond to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a life lesson in of itself. So I hope that I can continue to do it in different forms. And even if it's a life coach, to just sit down with someone and, hey, where are you at? And then they go off on tangents, and I'm thinking, well, what lights you up? Obviously, we're in this room because the common denominator is bikes, right? That revolves around two wheels. But at the end of the day, who's the person under the helmet? It's one of our brothers. It's one of our, sister, whoever's riding a bike. It's like you get off, you go to you go to a bike rally, you go to a bar, you go to a bike show, you're on a date night with a bunch of people, or you go on a camping trip, and everyone's under the helmet. And that's why I asked the question at the beginning of this podcast of like, could I recognize you on a bike just by how you ride, how you move, your mannerisms, what you say on the intercom? Are you moving your head? What's your style on the bike? And not that I analyze people to death when I'm out riding, because half the time I'm in my own space.
Sure.
But when I'm riding with Casey versus when I'm riding with other friends that I have, or when I'm on the racetrack and I know who I'm around, I can pick him out really fast.
Sure.
And I'm like, oh, that's so-and-so. How can you tell? Because every time he goes off a jump, he's doing a little leg swag. Is it effective? Maybe not, but that's his thing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of fun, because then when we take off the helmets and we go to chat about the ride or the race, or you get to a destination and it's still downpour rain, and you look around and you're like, I like this family. And then you open up.
Yeah.
There's certain times riding with different people. It's always a different experience. I think I really enjoy riding with you and Levi.
Good times.
Levi, he is part owner in one of the companies with me.
Okay.
And we usually have to try to keep it contained, but it's so much fun. And I think that we understand each other's riding styles. There's times that maybe like Levi, he rides really close to me, like insanely close to me, but it doesn't bug me because you keep your line and you kind of learn how to ride with those people, but it just adds to it. And it's hard for me at times to like stop riding with you guys and go and ride with other people.
It's funny how you develop almost, these relationships, and sometimes you'll go ride with a guy and you're like, man, that just didn't feel right.
Yep.
And then you might ride, say go to a ride out or something, and you ride next to a guy, and you're like, man, like me and this dude were like in sync. Like just, I was comfortable next to him. He was comfortable next to me. We were just in the, both kind of in the same zone. So I think you could both be in the zone, but two different zones, right?
Yeah.
And just not working together. And you
Good
might
point.
get to the gas station in the other side of the canyon, and you were like, man, I was in the zone, but this dude came in and like, he's like, no, I was in the zone, but your two zones just aren't jiving.
He's harsh and you're mellow.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Encino Man.
We did that a lot last year because we did our ride outs. It was just a monthly thing we did here. It was open to anybody who wanted to come ride with us.
Cool.
We just go ride. And sometimes you ride next to a guy and you're just like, man, this dude just kind of, at same pace. We kind of enter the corners kind of similar, that type of stuff or whatever. And then you get next to some guys and you're like, man, I got to get away from this guy. Right. You know what I mean?
Does that happen? I would imagine, I'm thinking dirt, but when you're doing bagger league and everything else, or flat tracking, you're racing. So racing has a different vibe where you're like, I'm just trying to not let this guy pass, or I'm trying to get around him. So you don't think so much about, are we gelling on the track? But there are times, and correct me if I'm wrong, where it's kind of this game of cat and mouse, and you're trying to pass the bastard, and maybe you get around him, but then he's trying to pass you, and it almost becomes fun where you're like, we're competing, but we become in our own little collective zone at that point, and you're like, man, you get done at the race, and you bump fists, and you're like, that was fun. It's competitive, but it's not egotistical.
Yeah.
And so does that happen when you're racing the big bikes out there, or what's the vibe on the asphalt?
Both have happened.
Okay.
You know what I mean? For me, if we're talking about the bagger,
Sure.
my good friend Arnie from Idaho Falls. Both of me and him have raced every Bagger Racing League race to date.
Together.
Well, I missed the last one last year, but I don't know what it is about me and him, but every time we race, we end up
You find each other?
we find each other on the track every time. And
That's great.
You know, like the last race that we had in Salt Lake, me and him finished first and second.
Oh, that was the one I came out to watch,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
But we were battling the whole time. And we came off the track and, you know, we're fist bumping and hugging each other because it was like one of the coolest things that we had ever done. And we were, you know, and it's like every race we go to, you know, it's like practice. It's like, oh, there's Arnie, like tuck in right behind him. Maybe I'll make it pass and he'll tuck in right behind me. And so, but then there's, you know, times where I'm like, okay, I got to get around this guy, and maybe I get around him and I check out, or I'm like, oh, this dude, he's a little wild. I need to like back off, or maybe I get around him and try and run from him, you know?
It's interesting how it is man and machine, or person and machine, whoever's racing. But your personality as a racer also shows up on the track, right? It's not just skill of you can twist the throttle, you can use the brakes, you can get into corners. Whatever creates our individuality shows up. And sometimes that chemistry does not jive. And
Right.
even, as I said, even though you can't see the person under the helmet, there are times, and I can feel it in my body, there are times where I will be next to someone, usually on the racetrack, not on the road. That would be dangerous. I don't like the guy.
Yeah.
Something inside my nervous system's like, not a friend.
Not a
friend.
Right.
And so do I let my ego down and I let him just kind of pull ahead, and I'm like, you do your thing. Like, I have no road rage right now. And then other times where I'm like, this dude, I'm going to punt him.
Yeah.
That's, if anyone listening, I'm not actually, I'm not aggro. Like, I'm not a mean person. If anything, I'm a pacifist, where as a child, I would see people that crashed, and my dad, I would go help them up. And my dad's like, what are you doing? Like, you're on the racetrack. I'm like, they fell over. I'm an empath,
Yeah.
right? I have my intensity. So it's like, don't push me. But times on the track, and I would see guys, and I'm like, something inside just makes that hair on the back of my neck stand up.
Yeah.
And I don't want to hurt them because I'm mad at them. I'm getting around him, or they come in a little too hot, and I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, dude, yeah, you want to play that game? It's weird how that starts to happen, though. And all you're doing is racing. But that's what makes racing racing. And so when you do have someone that you can gel with in a competitive nature, that synergistic energy elevates your game. And then you start drafting, and then you start pushing the speed, and then
Yeah.
you're picking up 3 seconds, and you're like, how are we doing this? We are doing this. It's not just me.
Yeah.
And we need those guys to help.
And that's how I kind of, like, me and Arnie, that's what happened with us. We made each other faster. I come off the track and I'm like, man, I just ran my best lap because I was chasing you. He's like, well, I ran my best lap because I was running from you. You know? He's like, you were pushing me and I had to go faster. And he's like, you know, and it was kind of, we both became faster because of each other.
Yeah.
And we kind of figured that out. And that's why, you know, we would start to go out and practice with each other.
Almost like a training partner.
Right. And we would come back and sit in the pits and say, how are you getting through this corner so fast? Or
Sure.
how are you getting the drive here? You know, and share information. When I'm on the track, I want to beat him,
Yeah. Well, absolutely.
but I also want him to go fast too. You know what I mean?
That's cool.
So it's a fun relationship that has come from racing in the racetrack. And, you know, now he's a good friend and we talk all the time. And but we met on the racetrack for the very first time.
Oh, no kidding.
You know what I mean?
So again, under the helmet.
Under the helmet. Yeah.
You do some weird stuff under your helmet. You've got to tell them about.
Oh, gosh, the Ducati
the
thing?
Ducati people up at your track, and
All right, we need some levity in this conversation. Okay, let's.
I honestly start laughing out loud. I'll just be at work by myself, and I'll
There's
think
a
of when
phrase,
he told
Biz.
me this, and I'll just start laughing
All
out
right,
loud.
let's hear it.
All right. Okay, how much are we doing? Good on time? How are we doing?
Yeah, we're doing all right.
Okay.
We're hour and 17 in.
Feel like we just got here.
It goes by fast, man.
Right.
I mean, you get into these conversations and
I love
time
it.
can fly.
Yeah, thanks again for letting us come
Yeah.
up here. I've been enjoying this. Okay, embarrassing moment 101, which is my race number as well. So learn a life lesson here. Okay, so years ago, Ducati was releasing their new adventure bike. I think it was their 1290 Pro, right? And they have what's called the DRE, it's Ducati Ride Experience. They were bringing it to the States to release the bike. Well, part of the experience was they were going to use our property, use the racetrack somewhere by the river where we could do an activation or do some log, technical riding, rocks. Well, we had issues with the county, again, which is part of the reason we were in a lawsuit for private property rights. We ended up shifting and doing it some other places. We had the lunch there. We made everything work, but the CEO of Ducati North America, Jason, was in town, so I got to meet them. I got to meet some other wonderful people from Ducati that came over from Italy, and they let me be a guest instructor. Well, keep in mind, I'd only been on an adventure bike like once before, so who am I to be an instructor? Right, on a bike that I've never been on. Until that morning of, I'd never set foot on one of those machines. And we took off ripping down Provo Canyon way faster than the speed limit because I'm with them and I'm like, well, I've
Got to keep up?
Yeah.
Or you got to show off?
And I was just like, well, I hope all my instincts are intact because I have no idea what this machine can do and I have no idea how it's going to handle, right? And it has 185 brake horsepower and it's 30 grand and I don't own the machine. So lots going through my head, but I'm having fun, right?
Yeah.
I'm sweating bullets. Along the couple of days that we're doing this, they also have a videographer and some filmers. And so all these people who pay to do this ride experience that fly in, like the CFO of Facebook was there. And Ricky Rocket, the drummer from Poison, was there, which him and I hung out a lot. I thought it was super fun. Just some high profile people, other people with just money, they want to get into it. Others just genuine, nice people. Didn't really matter at that point, right? The title doesn't matter. Once that helmet's on, you're
all just motorcyclists.
Yeah. And I love that about riding, right? When you give the 2-finger wave to someone on the road, you don't know who they are. Doesn't matter.
No.
So take all that into account, if you will. I'm trying to paint the picture, setting the stage. And no one knows who I am. So as a guest instructor, they're talking big names. The main guy, his name's Pepe. He's won Dakar, was back in like 84.
Okay.
So won the Dakar rally. He's kind of a brand ambassador for Ducati. He's from Italy. Super nice gentleman. He's kind of their spokesperson that shows up to all the events. And then that year we had Carlin Dunn as well. He passed away at Pikes Peak a number of years ago. Sad experience, but Carlin was there. Super fast guy, and a couple other super bike guys were there as guest instructors.
Okay.
So everyone there has a name. And then Spencer Luczak shows up, and they're like, who are you? Well, I'm me. That's all you need to know right now, okay? So one of the days, they let me take the lead because I know the traverse to get essentially from Park City to East Canyon. And we're just following the old Mormon Trail, so it's just that dirt road. It goes back. Nothing crazy, but they were just giving me the chance to go through because I knew the road, I can get there. And this is where it gets good. As we're going down this easy road, I'm standing up, I'm sitting. Dirt road.
Just setting the scene here.
Yeah,
For
right.
people that aren't familiar.
You know, it's kind of got that washboard feel to it from all the breaker bumps. It's nice. It's in the mountains, not super fast, but we're just cruising, kind of meandering on these bikes. And if you twist the throttle hard enough, you'll break loose and the back end will spin. So you got to be smart. But I'm doing little techniques where as we're going down the road, just, hey, stand up, shake your body out. If you're feeling loose or something else, like now's the time to do it. Get your leg out. Kind of give them some little instruction as we go. I, at some point, must have forgot that I was leading the group. And I also forgot that all the mics were interconnected. So you talked about going in your zone. I was in one of my happy places, and I forgot that I was leading the pack, and I just started talking to myself with an open mic. And for some reason, South Park was playing in my head. And we are going down the road, and out of nowhere, it dawned. You're gonna make me do the damn voice. I'm sitting there and I'm riding, and I'm just kind of in the happy spot, and I'm out front. So no one's in front of me. I forgot there's a videographer way out in front. Not a care in the world. And I start saying, they took our jobs. What? They took your jobs? They took your jobs. And I went through 20 different iterations of, they took your jobs.
They took our jobs.
Son of a bitch, they took your job. They took our jobs. And I'm doing this for like 3 minutes, just off in my head, just laughing, going through it. And I get done with, they took our jobs. Damn them. And now I'm back. 10, 20 seconds later, as I'm eyes on the road, I hear Pepe, this 84-year-old Italian who is following Sweep in the back. excuse me, Spencer, who took our jobs? And everyone on the intercoms starts busting up laughing, and I could hear the chase vehicle up front. Everyone is just dying, and I hear these little chants in the back like, they took his job. And the guy in the back's like, well, they're going to take his job now. But when I tell it in person, not on the mic, I'm in character the whole time. They took your jobs. And everyone that I've ever told that story, at some point, I will come up to them or they'll see me after a period of time, and they're like, Spence, who took your job? And it makes them laugh.
Yeah.
But it was a moment where this head guy doesn't know South Park. He doesn't know what's going on. So his legitimate ask
Just
did
concerned.
someone take your job? Yeah, he was concerned. I mean, he was legitimately just, are you okay? And then everyone else starts laughing. For the rest of the few days, I didn't hear the end of it. Anytime we went to get food, we were off the bikes, and someone would come up and they're like, oh man, that's fun. They take your job. And so now it's kind of a Ducati inside joke that when I flew back over to Italy to ride through Tuscany for a few days, the guy that I stayed with the whole time, he just...
That's the joke?
They took your jabs. And so I introduced him to South Park. These are all high-end clientele, and I'm sitting here quoting...
Watching South Park.
And I'm just like, sometimes that happens in life, but as you said, like those are the memories we remember.
Yeah.
And someone will come back and you're like, yeah, I remember that whole ride because I laughed. Mm-hmm. They weren't serious. I think if anything, it broke up kind of the ice of people feeling that stagnant, tense feeling where they forgot to breathe. And I think that busted people up enough. So once we started the next leg and got after it, they're like, yeah, I was totally calm. I just needed something to get me out of my head. Yeah, so if you ever want to know who took our jobs, I'll be the first one to claim that spot. So, fun days.
I wanted to ask you guys, I like to always ask everybody, because I'm always curious how what was your introduction to motorcycles? Where did it start for you guys?
Casey, you want to field this one first?
So growing up, I always wanted a dirt bike. And
Did you grow up in Utah?
Between Utah, I lived in Nevada for a bit.
Okay.
But mostly Utah.
Okay.
And central Utah around Richfield.
Okay.
And I remember, I think it may have been you on Instagram, you guys are doing a ride, not to like
Derail it?
Yeah, derail it. But
Our camp out this year.
yeah, the camp out.
Our camp out this year is in Sigurd,
Yep.
Sigurd.
which is, I'm not familiar either, but it's near Richfield.
So I grew up in the area. There is a road, Gooseberry Pass, that was gravel, and they paved over it, and it's like one of the most, like the switchbacks and the corners and the scenery, and you drop into Fish Lake that way.
Oh,
Okay.
So
that's that way.
it is a way that, like, I was looking at your guys' map. I'm like, oh, they should hit Gooseberry Pass because you could end up in the same place, and you're kind of leaving out maybe one of the less desirable sections of the ride.
Well, we'll have to talk about that.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah.
But growing up around there, I always wanted a dirt bike, but on ATVs, that's what I was riding at the time, similar to you. I was too crazy, as my dad would say. I never was able to get a dirt bike, but I still always wanted a motorcycle. I just thought they were super cool. The first time, I rode a few dirt bikes, friends, stuff like that, but not like really riding them, like just putting around. The first real bike ride I went on, my dad was the general sales manager for a car dealership, and for some reason he had a Honda Rebel or some bike. And I was 13 years old. I actually have a picture of it. My dad took a picture as I was coming back to the house before I got in a lot of trouble. But I took that bike out like 13, 14 years old, just cruising around Richfield on a Honda Rebel. And like that was a feeling that I was always like looking for. Fast forward, started dating a girl, fiance now, and her family all had Harleys. And I would want to like hang out with her, and she's like, no, it's Sunday. I told you I go on rides on Sunday. I'm like, well, shit, like I want to go on
She goes
rides.
on rides on Sunday.
Yeah. And so like they're out like every Sunday having all of this fun. And I was like, all right, I've got to get a bike. She was nice enough. I was like, yeah, I know how to ride. And so she would hop on the back of her Sportster, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And we're going on these long rides with like groups of experienced old riders, like riding in formation and stuff. A few months later, I ended up with a 2007 Sportster, like the Nightster 1200. And then from there, it was just game over. Motorcycles in every capacity is what I like. And what I mean by that is the history of them. I just go back as far, like if it's motorcycles, I honestly like it. And I'm sending him weird stuff all the time of like
Articles, I'm like, I have no idea what we're doing, but I like it. Keep sending them.
Yeah.
certain engineering things. So the history of bikes, the people that ride bikes, building bikes,
Engineers.
off-road engineers, like the nuances, the stuff that makes bikes special. I couldn't say if I enjoyed riding more or building more or like buying motorcycles, because I love finding motorcycles. Like that's a huge part of it for me. But yeah,
I mean, you're probably like me. I mean, I'm looking at the classifieds all the time. You know,
oh, it's so bad.
I love it.
I have to talk myself out of buying them.
Yeah.
Well, it's happened a time or two. Like, cool idea.
But that's pretty much it. I was actually talking to Sheridan, my fiance, and we were talking about how a lot of people get to a certain point and they're like, I'm selling the bike. Like, it's kind of dangerous out there for whatever reason, which I respect. I wouldn't want to try to convince somebody to stay on a bike. But I told her, even if I wasn't riding motorcycles, it's still a part of my future. I have that much interest in the other aspects. Even if I can't ride a motorcycle, I'm still going to be involved in it
You're
in
going to buy
some way.
them, build them, and put them on a shelf.
Whatever it is, even if I'm just working on it for people. But yeah, they feed off of each other too.
Yeah.
Like finding them, and then the love of building bikes also impacts the love of riding bikes, and vice versa. I love them. I've met some of my best friends on motorcycles. I've had some of the funnest times. I think, like, not to sound like corny with it, but like I think I've learned some of the most valuable life lessons through motorcycles and like what they can teach you. Like personal, like when you have a goal that's out there and then seeing it through, things that come up, overcoming them.
Discipline to finish the project.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
I just love everything about bikes, and that's kind of been my journey in it, and I'm really looking forward to like the next 10 years, because I was listening, this is a side thing, I was listening to an interview with Bjork, weird musician, and she said she was talking about making her like third album, and she said she was just barely catching up with everything that she had in her brain. So the first two albums, she was just releasing her past catalog that was built up. And it took up until her third album to have stuff that was coming out that was new. And I kind of feel like that's where I'm at, where like the next 10 years, like I've had these ideas from the past and things I've wanted to do, where it's like finally time to get to business, and you know, you kind of earn your place in this world, I think. You've got to meet the people, you've got to know how to do things and stuff like that. And I'm just really excited for like the next 10 years of building.
Cool.
Yeah, I dig that.
I like it. I mean, I can appreciate the building side of it, because I'm very much, you know, that's a big part of it for me too, is the building part of it. But there's just so much that comes along with it. You know, the people you meet.
Yep.
You know, just listening, you know, even just this conversation, just listening to people that I know exactly what they're saying, what you mean when you say you look at a motorcycle and you feel a certain way, like it's the same for me. So it's just cool to just have the opportunity to talk to people that get
that,
you know, whatever
that is.
whatever that is, you know, that feeling that I get when I see something that just, and it's just cool to me.
Yeah.
And it might not be cool to you, but there's stuff out there that makes you feel that way. The feeling is the same.
Yes.
Might not be the same bike.
But articulating what that is can be difficult.
Yeah.
Right? To put it into words. I think about emotions in general. And typically for guys, we're not always the best at explaining what the emotions are when they come up.
Sure.
Or what we're going through, right? I'm sure a lot of women look at men and they're like, just tell me how you feel. And you're like, I'm feeling something. I don't know how to get it out.
Sure.
So
I mean, you know, I've been married for 20 years and I have 3 daughters.
Oh,
so,
estrogen. Lovely.
You know, trying to deal with emotions and feelings. Yeah. But motorcycles, it's easy for me.
Yeah, it's one of your mediums,
Yeah.
right? To pull in a little bit of that artwork earlier. whether you're painting on canvas or you're using clay or colored pencils, one of our mediums, our canvas, 2 wheels.
Yeah.
It's a frame, suspension, motor. Like that is a canvas for us. And that is a creative outlet in a healthy way that allows us to connect, right? We're connecting somehow. It's grounding us and inspiring us at the same time. So yeah, that feeling when you can't describe it, but you look at the same thing and we're both have different viewpoints, but we feel it. You're like that, whatever that is. You're like, I got you. And you almost don't need words, which is also an interesting thing, not just about males, but I think more often in male groups, less talking and more just sitting in the moment, right? Where girls are like, what'd you talk about? Stuff? Well, what's going on? Well, and you give basics, but they want to know. I love details. So if anything, I can be the chatty Cathy.
I get no details. If
Right.
Sheridan asks me something, I don't know.
And they want to know. Like I can kind of go that route and it's fine, but typically with guys, it's nice to be able to sit somewhere like at a campsite or you pull over on the side of the road and like you have stuff to do. So we have to communicate, but a lot of what we communicate is not verbal.
Yeah, it's just kind of sitting there soaking in the moment.
Yeah, and there's some sort of, whether it's telepathy or some other strange form, right? We're able to just sit there and be like, I know what you mean, man.
A mutual understanding.
Yeah.
And I do think that comes with, like, once you know that somebody's built a bike at your level, and you're like, all right, I mean, those times when you're so frustrated working on something that you kind of have to like step away, and you have to move your emotions out of the way to do a good job on this, and knowing that somebody else, I'm sure you've had a moment that you've been so pissed off and you just have to like walk away from it. Because bikes, they don't care if you're upset. They don't care if you're trying hard. And to know that somebody else has been through that, I think it's an instant connection.
Sure.
On the building side.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you could say, how's the build going? And you just give them that look and you're just like, son of a...
Good luck with that.
Yeah,
You'll get there.
Someone's just like, hey, let's go get something to eat, or they do something else, but they're like, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
And we don't really have to go in depth unless someone needs to get something out. You can just sit with that person and be like, I got you.
Yeah.
There is a moment that comes to mind with you. I was in my head nearing the end of that Sportster build, and you came out to the shop, and I remember asking you, does it look like I'm close to being done? And you didn't want to say it, but you're like, no.
Yeah. I mean, were you?
No.
Right?
I was working on it literally until like the last second that I had to push it into the trailer.
Yeah.
And I actually worked on it when it was like in tie-down straps, like in the trailer.
Yeah. And I've done that. I've done that so many times where, you have nothing, and you have parts just scattered, right? And you get a frame, and you get suspension and wheels on it, and you set a motor in it, and you're like, man, I'm almost done.
Exactly.
Like, but wait, there's a whole lot of details still to deal with.
I'm just ignorant and naive, so I wanted
still
to fool.
do it. Yeah, I still do it because you put all the big pieces together and you think you're almost done.
Yeah.
But you're not even halfway there.
It's just the quick, fast progress that makes a big visual difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which does feel good.
Oh, it's great. It's a great feeling.
When you get that
Because you're
sensation.
seeing it for
Putting
the first time.
the tins on for the first time, popping a motor into the
it
frame.
takes shape, right?
Those are
Yeah.
my favorite pictures of it. Like if I go back and look at the build for whatever reason, if I see the pictures, it's not the bike completed. It's when it's a roller or something like that.
Well, here's what I hate, because this is what I've done, is I've done that. Assemble the big pieces, right? And then you sit back and you just look at it. And I'll just sit and look at it for hours. And I'm like, man, it's so beautiful. But then you got to put all this stuff on it
All
to
of the
make
bullshit.
it work.
Yep.
And then you look at it and you're like, man, it was so much prettier without all that shit on it.
Simplicity.
You know what I mean? The brake lines, the wiring, the switches, the lights or whatever. I mean, and that's where, it becomes challenging, is to make it look like it's a roller, but all that stuff's there. You know what I mean?
Like internal wiring.
Internal wiring, hide all that stuff, make it disappear into the
Yep.
bike.
Yeah.
That's the,
Simple's
I did
my
that a
favorite
lot
look.
on the bike behind me. I spent a lot of time hiding all that stuff. I spent a stupid amount of time running the entire wire harness inside the frame,
Really?
Yep.
hiding everything. You know what I mean?
Which to a seasoned, I wouldn't just say builder, let's just say a bike aficionado.
Is it fuel injected?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot more wires.
It's a lot of wires.
Yeah.
Those are the things, at least for me, that's one of the aspects of a bike or thinking of the builder that I appreciate the most, that most people wouldn't even notice until you point it out. And they're like, oh, where's the wiring? Like, where's the wiring?
Yeah.
It's inside.
It's all there.
And that took a lot of work. So conceptually, I'm like, that's a lot. But the fact that you took time to make that a detail, that's hidden.
I mean, I went so far on that bike, right, that bike is a 2006 and it had throttle cables, right?
Dual
Throttle cables coming out of the throttle, out of the switch housing, right? It did.
Okay. Yeah, I was like,
It did.
I ain't seen anything over there.
But I didn't want them because it was just one of those things that I didn't want hanging out there. So I was like, well, I'm going to convert it to a newer bike that uses throttle by wire.
Okay.
But that took a whole bunch of adapting, and because it's a different platform and a different motor. So there was some adapting that had to be done. But I bought a wire harness and an ECM and an entire electronic system off of a newer bike.
That
Put it
had
on the
the
2000s
throttle by
that
wire.
had a throttle by wire. And that was a ton of money and a ton of work just to get rid of throttle cables.
But those are my favorite things.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, that was so much money and so much time for the littlest detail that
People don't notice.
you would walk by it and you would never be like, oh, this is an 06. It's supposed to have throttle cables, but it doesn't. But nobody has ever said that to me.
No.
I know it.
Have they asked you the question, though, once you explain that, do you get the question, was it worth it?
To me, yeah.
And
I bet you
do it
learned
again.
a lot.
I learned a ton.
I bet it was more like for me in those circumstances. It's like the learning that's the real reward.
And I had to learn stuff that I didn't know that I had to learn. I didn't know I needed to learn it until it was a problem.
Exactly.
So I'm like, oh, I didn't think about this. This isn't going to work with this. Now I got to figure it out.
What's the phrase? You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I hear people say that to me, and even though I know the phrase, they'll say it. I'm like, yeah, you're right.
Yep. So,
Okay.
yeah, I get it. So, in the build process, it's cool to get it to that point, but keeping it in that clean state is
There's something about it.
Do you guys have a favorite builder, or something like that? Because you were talking a lot about style.
Yeah.
You know, under the helmet, and you can kind of tell who it is riding.
Yeah.
Where for music, there's maybe a song I haven't heard before, but I can hear it. Nobody's sung one word or anything, and you're like, oh, that's this band because their sound is so recognizable.
It has a signature.
And I do think there's builders where they could put out a bike, or maybe it's a bike I haven't seen before, and you can tell. Like Jeff Wright, one of my favorite builders, because he kind of has like a punk rock style. He works on everything. Like I want to work on everything. I don't want to stick to one style of bike.
But all of his bikes,
crazy and so
they're
original.
all crazy and wild, but they're all Jeff Wright.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's
you
his
can just
stamp.
tell. And then Maxwell
Hazen would be one of mine. I've never met the guy. You know, I've only seen a handful, mostly on social media, and I don't know him personally, right? But I see how it almost seems like he's very methodical about what he does, right? Almost like what was the guy's name back in the day? Still Jesse James,
Yeah.
right? When they would do the biker build off, he was always kind of late to the party, and it didn't have a lot of flash, and he didn't necessarily win the people's choice because it wasn't in your face. But he learned metalwork and frame building and like ground up, like all of the actual physical process. And his bikes were not necessarily super artistic with paint and
Like
flair.
flashy paint and
But man,
crazy.
he touched every part of that bike, and everything was thought about, and there were details within details. And so just kind of that approach, I think Maxwell Hazen, I love looking at his stuff simply because he'll take an idea that maybe it doesn't even need to be done. Like you said with the ride-by-wire. Did I need to do that? No, not necessarily. It wasn't broken. But he'll take a concept and is like, oh, I'm going to make my own wheel. And then he machines out the hub, and then he figures out the spoke pattern into a velodrome or like a dished hoop or something. And whether it's practical or not, but the fact that he does this with the big picture in mind, and then when he finishes it, and you look at his velocity stacks that come off, and I'm like, oh, you machined those. You didn't buy them. And he's like, yeah, it didn't fit what I was looking for. So it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. Ferdinand Porsche, the guy who founded the car company Porsche, in an interview way back in the day, someone asked a question, Same thing. What's your dream car? Do you have a favorite car out there? And he said, no, that's why I built my own company. And I'm like, yeah, that hit home for me where
That's
I'm like,
cool. Yeah.
well, if you asked me what's your dream car or dream bike, I'm like, doesn't exist, I'd build it. And with different components and things that I've learned. And so
Yeah.
I like builders that kind of go after that thought of, I respect everyone's work. I'm not copying anyone, but my vision is different, and therefore I have to pave my own way. And they do it in different modalities. And I think any builder that kind of goes that route gets my, tip of the hat.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's hard because sometimes those bikes, like I think like the Jesse James example is one that does not get the
Like the fanfare.
fan, it's not going to win people's choice.
Yeah. It's not super
But
sexy.
every one of the guys who have built a bike, they're like, that bike is badass.
Yeah, it's a builder's
It's
bike.
the builder's bike.
Yeah, which is an interesting category to have.
Sure.
Right? If you were at a bike show or something and you get People's Choice Award, it's
Are we
probably a cool-
talking, general public people, or are we talking builder people? Because those are two different bikes.
Two very different bikes.
And that would be kind of an interesting one. I don't know
Sure.
if you have that coming up for the bike show
It's
or
something
anything.
to think about.
But even if it's a side award where you're like, hey, this is a different category, and in the invitations or something else, you say just amongst a certain group or whatever, be like, you guys pick one.
Yeah.
And then you kind of have your own little duty to go through and nitpick from our own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's right or wrong doesn't matter, but just what's the result of that and why? Mm-hmm. That could be an interesting spin because I've never been to a show where maybe they
It's
have
builder's
what's
choice. I'm sure it's happened, but it's not common.
Right.
It's always, voted on by the people that are attending the show.
Sure.
And it's always the one with the bright, crazy paint job.
Paint job.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe the spikes and pointy parts sticking off of it or whatever, kind of the extreme
that
stuff.
was an actual experience that at the One Moto show.
There was the dragon bike.
There was an actual dragon
Yeah,
bike.
Or alligator or something like that, which I'm like, okay, that's creative. I can't knock it, but I wouldn't.
But when people are said, when people are asked, pick your favorite bike, the one that pops in their head first is the memorable one.
That was some shock value, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, or a visual image if it was
And that's
bright.
the one they pick. And they didn't pick it for any other reason than it's the one that's stuck in their mind.
Yeah, which
And you're gonna, if you had to think back on, and you said earlier, the one bike you loved at the One Moto show, wasn't super flashy, but it had details in it that you appreciated, and you looked at it differently.
100%.
I don't know if I could actually recall what my favorite bike was. I was a bit overwhelmed. It's
Really?
like when I would go to SEMA, like for my other business, and you just, there's a Pagani, there's another Lamborghini. You're seeing these like extremely valuable cars,
Right.
extremely rare cars, and you just kind of get desensitized to it.
Yeah.
I take motorcycles in slower. I don't know. I need a minute. Like I actually want to sit down and look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Moto One or the One Moto was a bit overwhelming for me in the way that I couldn't fully take in bikes. And I remember sitting down, and it was a bike that wasn't standing out at all. And I just needed a break, sit down, and it was just the closest bike to me. And then I was blown away. I'm like, all of this detail and all of this shit that people aren't looking at on this bike.
Yeah.
Right. Because they had famous, like well-known builders.
Carey
and
Hart.
Carey Hart's were there, and coming from the moto background, I was like, cool.
That's cool.
Yeah. And a lot of cool stuff in it. Gold leafing in the paint,
Yeah.
different stuff, and I'm like, that's awesome. I don't know why this one's standing out to me. I didn't think of it till now. Maybe the rarity of it and a personal connection to the dirt bike world. Someone had, and I cannot remember the years, so if anyone's watching this, critiquing my knowledge of dirt bikes, go ahead. I don't remember if it was the 70s. Harley Davidson was in the motocross scene back in the day, competing in the outdoor championship. Only for like 2 or 3 years. And I don't want to say 70s because I'm going to get that totally wrong, but metal tank, metal fenders.
Was it the AMF bike, the two-stroke?
It was a two-stroke MX 250
Orange.
is what they called it.
Yeah, there was one of those there. Whoa, it just gave me chills again. It was sitting kind of behind your Sportster, but they didn't have it on display as like one of the bikes. I think someone brought it in one of the booths, so it was just kind of there.
Kind of like setting the scene, kind of building
Yeah, but it was in the back. Like wouldn't even notice it. Like in fact, most of the time people probably walked by, but I didn't notice it at first because someone brought it in after the show started. But I was talking to another gentleman who's a big off-road guy. There were a couple of those, not legends, but like people were like, if you know them, you know them. But they're not going to show their face to let you know, like, oh, Bob Hanna's here. Wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I'm chatting with this guy, and he said, hey, did you see that Harley 250 over there? No, I did not. Where is it? So we went over and started chatting, and I could see it from a distance, and I was like, it's history.
Yeah.
And it's in like OEM condition, so I mean, nothing's been changed to it. But just the fact that it's there, like I was like, can I touch it? Like literally, I was like, can I touch it? I was like, because it has such deep roots to me of like motocross that I'm like, I was learning something new.
Yeah.
Even though I feel that I'm fairly well versed in bikes, I just looked at it, I was like, I know nothing of this. Teach me. Mm-hmm. So he began telling me the history, and then we went through and looked at catalogs, and I'm just admiring the bike, and I'm like, I had no idea.
I've always wanted one of those bikes too.
So
I've
cool.
been
I almost
fascinated
bought
with
two of them.
Really?
Yeah, in Richfield. And I almost got a Survivor Triumph chopper that was like, oh man, I'm still like, there's two bike deals that I think so bummed out. One was an RZ 350, and the other one, it was a 3-bike deal, and the Triumph was like a 1956 molded tanks. So I think the bike was turned into a chopper in the 70s, and everything's molded in, and it had that crazy, I don't even know what you would call the paint job, but it was airbrushed in crazy like 70s shapes and bright and colorful.
Interesting.
And she was about to make the deal, and then she was like, no, I can't do it. And it turns out, I won't talk about the rest of the story. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. But I almost got two of those in with that Triumph.
It's fascinating.
Crazy. So we getting back to my question.
Oh, yeah.
You talked about rad.
Yeah.
Were you a BMX kid?
Oh, man. Crew Jones, Bart Taylor. High noon. Like, we'll be there. So I can give you the short and skinny of, I guess, into biking in general, and then I'll bring in rad. Right?
Okay.
Because that's had a big impact on me my whole life. So my dad didn't get into riding until he was a little older. Immigrant family, Germany and Poland, right? It was kind of that guy that, I don't know if he rebelled against the culture. He just didn't want to be seen as different back in the 60s and something else. Like if you're from Europe, you kind of get ostracized. I'm not sure, but he turned into like the black sheep, oldest of 4 boys, big into skateboarding, doing all this other stuff. But I know bikes at some point were kind of always there. My grandpa, when he was orphaned, Poland, his parents were killed during the war, forced into East Germany. But at a young age, we still have an original photo from, I think, like 1947 of him on some motorcycle. Maybe it was a BSA.
Really?
Yeah. I have it on my phone. I'll show you after we're done here. In black and white, and in a full suit. Him and whoever his buddy is, they're like 14, and they're wearing suits because everything was a lot more proper back then. You were dressed up when you went out, even to play. And they're on these 2 motorcycles with the fin, just like you see from The Great Escape or something else. And I don't know if that was like a passion necessarily for racing and everything, but just motorcycles have been around, but they didn't necessarily have them as kids when they were growing up. So racing didn't come to my dad till much later. Started when he was maybe 19, 20, like much later in the game. And then went back to Loretta Lynn's for the biggest amateur race in the country. Took 6th overall in the 500 open class.
Your dad did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
In
So
what class?
500.
Okay.
So big bikes. And did so well. Like he could tell
What
the
year
story
wa-
better.
what-
That was
about-
86.
Okay.
I was born in 87. So the year before I was born, I still have his bib, AMA bib, Loretta Lynn's. It's got the pin on there.
That's so
with
cool.
the team green Kawasaki hang loose. Like that. Oh, man, I'm getting chills. That
That was the heyday of the 500 days.
Yeah. You get Jeff Ward.
Yeah.
Bailey, all those guys running the big bikes where you got to be a man to hold on to like a Yamaha 490 that'll rattle your teeth to pieces. Every now and again, I get the vintage bikes that will come up, and I get to sit on an old Bull Taco, and they'll be like, "Yeah, go ride it." I'm like, "This thing's a death trap," and I'm chattering. My feet are chattering, and thinking those guys raced not 30-minute motos plus 2 laps. They were racing 40 minutes, and Euros were racing 40, 45 minutes
Wow.
plus 2 laps.
The conditioning
Right.
would be
Unreal.
To go through it, and they
insane.
didn't have training. They weren't doing calisthenics. They weren't doing.
They were just men.
They were probably smoking a cigarette in the pits.
Yeah.
Were they racing
down
in jeans and
Well, I mean, there's pictures. I mean, I look at him, and this guy my dad always talks about from Colorado, I can't remember if they call him the caveman, but dude would show up in cut off jean jacket, like literally, as you talked about earlier on the
Yeah.
Harleys, jean vest, gloves with little spikes on them, Dude would show up with a 3/4 helmet on and just smoke people. And he would put his bike in the back of like a station wagon, take the front wheel off, dip the nose down, ass up. And then that's how he got from race to race. But the dude was just an animal and would show up and he'd race and
Smoke the field and go home.
yeah. So I hear stories like that growing up. And, you know, so my dad getting into races, that's kind of how it started. He had what was called maybe a satellite factory ride. So you'd get like a race bike and a practice bike. You get support. So you're not a full factory guy, but you're not quite a privateer. However it worked back in the day. White Brothers was one of his first sponsors.
Okay.
So his first, like the bike that we just bought, we're going to kind of replicate his old factory bike. First upside down forks from WP. So just seeing stuff like that, it had what my dad calls a turbo crank. I still don't know how this all works out, right? But cone pipe, the works, just looking at different things. And he was like, yeah, that was the stuff back in the day. And I'm like, cool. But that's kind of how I grew up. And during his racing career, injuries would happen. And, you know, knees pulled apart, shoulders ripped apart. So because of those surgeries that would sideline racing, where he was then helping my grandpa with his trades, kind of doing work on the side. My mom worked full-time job. My dad was injured, but then eventually he took over motorsports programs and revitalized that in like Wyoming and parts of Colorado, and would do races in Idaho. So the track in Preston, Idaho, my dad had built that. It's long stories, but essentially he took over the motorsports while he was kind of racing, while still doing construction and all these things going on there. So I was at the races. He was in the booth announcing. He was the one promoting and getting the race money. So his pro purse in 1993, that amateur race, he would get all these big names to come because his pro purse was $30,000. And $30,000 is a lot. Even local races today can't pull anything near those numbers.
Yeah.
He was the
That's
first
a
guy.
lot of money back then.
Oh, huge. 93, I think he also, ESPN, the first televised event in Wyoming was my dad's monster truck show, The World of Outlaws. Gravedigger, Snakebite, Bigfoot, Keystone Crusher, the Coors Light truck.
Was Ron Duncombe there?
I don't know. I'd have to ask my dad.
Okay.
But like I have pictures of him standing, black and white, long curly mullet, hat on, mustache, smiling with a checkered flag. He's got the walkie-talkies. So he's wearing multiple hats, literally. But I was a kid kind of running around mud bogs, tractor pulls, and motorcycles. We didn't necessarily have a lot of money, but because we were involved in those things, childhood was
There was
not
always
boring.
stuff there.
Yeah. So PW50s was my first bike. And like I was okay, like still riding a bike. I'm not like a slouch, but I had other things that kind of took over that took me around the world to do other things. But being on a bike was always there. BMX bike, moto, didn't matter. We had wheels. And then from promoting, we'd kind of go build tracks out by Flaming Gorge, full sand track. And no one can find it. So if anyone's watching this, good luck finding the thing. It's still there. The remnants are still there. You have to go across the river, past the archery chute, go a couple miles down the road, and then right along the banks of the Green River, there's a full sand track that we built with jumps and everything else. And then we had our normal tracks and then the rut tracks. So sprinkled all around Green River and Rock Springs, you'll find a dozen or so tracks that my dad personally built, along with like the outdoor, facilities and everything. So for me, that was kind of, I was probably on a bike when I, was a fetus. I came out of the womb and it was like, oh, hey, you do this with your right hand. Something like that. And learning, when you asked about BMX and rad started coming into place, in order for me to learn how to use a clutch, I think it was my KX65 was my first bike with a clutch. That wasn't auto. And Europeans do this with their mountain bikes. Their brakes are backwards. So the front brake's on the right side. So next time you go to ride a mountain bike, pay attention to where your brakes are. It's not the same as your road bike. Front brake's always on the right. Well, any mountain bike you ride here in the States comes stock with the front brake over on the left. So my dad, in order for me to understand the concept of the clutch, put my right brake on the front side, or on the right side, and then my clutch hand was essentially the back brake. In order to go, I had to release it. And that's what taught me to learn how to ride a clutch on a motorcycle.
Okay.
But then with rad coming in, I think the GT box series, the Interceptor, my Dyna, Robinson, the whole BMX scene, it was like that was kind of just hand in hand. But I remember the first time I watched rad, and every kid looks at anything extreme and they're like, man, that's so cool. But I don't know why it had such an indelible impact on my body. Physically, I would watch what he's doing and how he's training, but the music to get pumped up and just the love of riding through the lumberyard. And then when he gets to race day, when he's practicing the backflip, and the girl from Full House, I can't think of her name, the brunette. She's the female writer.
Yeah.
And they're doing the dance, but they're riding bikes. And Send Me an Angel comes on.
Send Me an Angel. And it's like, you watch it now and you're like,
It's
this
so
is
corny.
terrible. Yeah.
Right? But the song sticks in my head, and I'm like, yeah, the lights come down. It's kind of like Kevin Bacon in Footloose.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you can knock the movie all you want, but I'm like, it hits me. So those moments in the movie were huge. But I remember one phrase from that movie has stuck with me my whole life. And sometimes I try and help people when I'm teaching them body mechanics to use it, but I just think it's a principle for life. He keeps trying the backflip, and it's not working out, right? Every time he hits this ramp, he's got a landing that has mattress pads on it. And every time he goes up, he gets to about right here and then lets go of the bike. Just keeps dropping it. Well, she comes up to him at one point and says, even if you land, those mattresses are just going to take you out. And he's like, are you kidding me? Like, are you nuts? Like, that's his safety net metaphor. She's like, yeah, and you got to keep following your head. Where your head goes, your body goes, right? And that was the principle that stood out to me. But he gets to the top of the hill and takes the pads off, and she looks at him. She's like, no guts, no glory. Your body follows your head. So he goes down, flips, over-rotates, lands right on his back, and lands and just knocks the wind out of him. And she comes over the top of him and looks down, and he's trying to breathe, and she's like, you over-rotated. And he's staring up at her, and he's like, no shit. And I just remember laughing at that scene, but then he goes up, and eventually he sticks it after a couple of tries. But that phrase, your body follows your head, like where your eyes go, your body follows. And for some reason, that just stuck with me of whether I'm racing or doing something else, what my focus is on is where the rest of you will go. And just that concept of like, that's rad, kind of just came into play. And every time I'd be out there, I'm thinking Crew Jones, and Thunder in Your Heart song would come up, and I would just pedal as hard as I could. But they're also building the jumps. So like you said, building is half the fun.
Yeah.
Building a jump line to me is the day. Our racetracks that we have now, when I'm in the machines, I'm sculpting, I'm terrascaping. And for me, that is my artwork. The bikes are just kind of secondary. And when I'm on them, I get to see, did that work? How does the flow feel? And then is my bike set up to do the same thing? And they kind of start working together. So for me, riding is super fun, but building gives me the most gratification, because then I get done with it and I'm like, yeah, I'm proud of my hard work. Now I get to go enjoy it. And so that concept of rad is just my way of reminding other people to do what you do and remember the why. So if someone else wants to build a bike that looks different than mine, but they look at it and they're like, that's rad. And then they look at mine and the license plate says rad. And I'm like, damn straight. So for me, that's just that way of put your flair into something.
Yeah.
Make it your own. Respect other people. They're going to do it different. But at the end of the day, we get older and we kind of get in our routines, whether it's work or relationships or something else, and we lose that little zest of what made us come alive in the first place. So I'll go out in the garage, and the Triumph says Moto on it. I don't know how I got the license plate Moto, but I did. And I'll look at that, and I'll see rad, and I'll see something else. I'm like, man, why am I so stuck in my head?
Yeah.
I need to get on my bike. And I go out, and I come back, and that little kid just smiles a little bit and says, hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for paying attention to me. So that's why rad is so important.
That's cool. Well, we're getting long in time. Before we wrap up, just want to tell everybody, let everybody know like where they can kind of follow along with you guys, or find you guys or whatever.
Yeah.
You're on Instagram.
I am. I took a little bit of a hiatus, still off.
Okay.
I needed a mental break.
Sure.
So my accounts, you can't find me, but Luczak 101 is
Okay.
my account. So when I come back on, we'll post some stuff. Follow me. I'll try and answer questions.
Sure.
Honestly, if you want to ask me a question, I don't know if I give my cell number or my email. Honestly, if you guys want to reach out, 801-647-5725.
It's ballsy.
That's awesome.
That is my direct cell. If you have a question
All
about
hours too, right?
well, I mean, between 6 and 9. Thank you. Right. Thank you. Yeah, feel free. If you want to text me first, I appreciate it. Give me some context who you are. If you have a question about bikes, or even if it's just a life question, we're here.
Right on.
Right. Respect it. But that's how you can find me for now. If not, the Flying Iron Horse Ranch is my dad's account. He doesn't post a lot, but if you want to see what's going on with the property,
It's a beautiful property. I've driven past it and I've seen all the photos.
This year. We're getting you there.
I wanna
Maybe we
get-
have a ride day there one of these times.
Do it, man.
Just set up a
Make it
barbecue.
happen. Yeah.
So-
I'd love to come out and check it out in person. You got a bunch of stuff.
So my personal Instagram, it's just my full name at Casey Lamprecht. If you can spell my last name, you can follow me.
It's a good kind of weed out the
Yep.
riffraff. There you go.
Salty Motorworks, just at Salty Motorworks. That's my business. That's my day job where I get to work on a lot of cool cars. There are motorcycles sprinkled in there, but I do my best not to alienate the Salty Motorworks following with too many bike things.
Yeah.
And then the other one, I had to check my phone. I haven't been very active on it, but it's for the bigger goal of my involvement with motorcycles, which is Rare Form, and that one is Rare Form Company. Just like, if you're in rare form or something like that. So Rare Form Company.
Cool. Well, I thank you guys.
Yeah,
It's been a
thank
good
you.
conversation.
I've had fun.
I mean, we could keep going for another 2 hours, but
Right? I was built for stamina, not speed.
I want to get out though and ride. I want to ride with you, with you
yeah,
more.
We haven't done a ride yet.
we need to get out and make it happen
That'll be nice.
for sure. And you guys are going to be part of our art show, motorcycle art show coming up
Yes.
this summer.
That's in June, right?
Yeah, June. I'm excited to have you guys participate and have some motorcycles there.
I'm going to bring out Broomhilda.
Oh boy. Yeah, and I'll bring little Susie.
Yeah, it'll be cool.
Broomhilda and Lil Susie.
Yeah, I'll
Sweet.
No, I appreciate it. The invite
Yeah.
means a lot, and
Yep.
just to be involved in the moto community and see other people's artwork.
Yeah.
I'm really excited for that.
Right on.
Yeah.
Thank you guys.
Yeah,
Thanks for
thanks for having
coming out.
us.
Appreciate it.
Yep.